Yo, what's up everyone? It's Magic Bloodline, and today we're checking out, what if the Addams family crashed Harry's trial after Chamber of Secrets and Fudge resigned in terror dark humor. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, The Summons. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. This was, in itself, unremarkable. Letters arrived at the Addams estate with some regularity: funeral invitations, legal summons, the occasional death threat from a neighbor who had finally snapped after one too many incidents involving Pugsley's experiments in the East Yard. The postman had long since learned to leave correspondence on the iron gate rather than approach the house, a wisdom born from two separate encounters with Thing and one deeply formative experience involving the topiary. What made this particular letter remarkable was the seal. Gomez Addams was in the middle of his morning fencing practice when Morticia glided into the courtyard, envelope held between two elegant fingers, her expression carrying that particular quality of mild interest she reserved for things she found genuinely curious. He spun, lunged, parried an invisible opponent, then caught the look on his face and let the sword drop to his side. Something interesting, cara mia? Potentially. She turned the envelope over. The wax seal was stamped with an emblem, a large letter M surmounted by stars, surrounded by text too small to read from a distance. It is addressed to you. The ink is self-warming. Whoever sent it wanted to make quite certain it was opened. Gomez crossed the courtyard in 4 long strides, snatched the envelope with the enthusiasm of a man who has never once in his life received a boring piece of mail, and tore it open. He read it once very fast, eyebrows climbing. He read it again slowly, lips moving, a smile beginning somewhere around his mustache and spreading outward in both directions until it occupied most of his face. "Tish," he said, and his voice had that low, reverent quality it got when he was truly moved. "Do you know what this is? I suspect it is either a legal summons or an invitation to something wonderful. It is both." He held it up. "It's from somewhere called the British Ministry of Magic. Specifically from the office of the Wizengamot, that's a court, cara mia, a magical court, regarding a disciplinary hearing." He paused for effect, because Gomez Addams understood instinctively that all great news deserved a pause. For one Harry James Potter. Morticia was quiet for a moment. Lily's boy. Lily's boy. Gomez folded the letter with tremendous care. "Apparently he's been summoned to answer for, let me get this right, unauthorized magical activities, endangerment of fellow students, and conduct unbecoming of a student of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. He's 12. He's 12, he defeated a basilisk in an underground chamber, and now they want to put him on trial for it." Gomez looked at his wife. His wife looked at him. "Tish, we are going to England." "Obviously," said Morticia, and went inside to pack. Wednesday was in her room dissecting something that had arrived in a jar labeled "Do Not Open" when her father knocked. She called for him to enter without looking up. "We're going to England," Gomez said from the doorway. "When?" "Thursday. Your cousin, very distant, through your great-great-aunt Esmeralda on your mother's side, will explain the family tree on the train, has been summoned to a magical tribunal. He's 12 years old and the charges are frankly absurd, and I intend to tear their entire legal framework apart and present the pieces to the court with a bow." Wednesday set down her scalpel. She turned around. "He killed a basilisk." "He did. At 12. Indeed." Something shifted in Wednesday's expression, something that on any other child's face might have been excitement, but on Wednesday's was more like the careful attention of a predator recognizing another predator for the first time. "I want to see the chamber. I had assumed you would. Tell Pugsley he's not allowed to blow up anything until we've cleared the ministry building." "I'll tell him he can blow up the ministry building. Father. I'll tell him he must wait until we've cleared a 3-block radius of uninvolved civilians." Gomez considered. "A 2-block radius. Growth requires some risk." Wednesday turned back to her dissection. "I'll be ready Thursday morning." The problem, as Gomez explained to the family assembled in the dining room that evening over a dinner that involved no fewer than 3 dishes that the cookbook had recommended serving with gloves, was one of context. The wizarding world is hidden, he said, gesturing with his wine glass at nothing in particular. They have their own government, their own laws, their own quite remarkable tradition of solving problems by pointing sticks at them. The Addams family has peripheral connections to this world. Your great-great-aunt Esmeralda was, by all accounts, a witch of considerable talent, but we ourselves are what they would call squibs or muggles, depending on which branch of the family one examines. He paused. Except for your mother. Everyone looked at Morticia. Morticia did not look up from her dinner. My heritage is my own business. Of course, cara mia. The point is that the wizarding world has been operating under the impression that Lily's branch of the family, specifically the Muggle branch, had no knowledge of Harry's existence worth considering. They sent this letter, I suspect, expecting no response, or at best a confused telephone call from someone called Vernon. His tone shifted subtly on the name, the way it does when a man is exercising extraordinary restraint. They did not expect us. They should have done their research, said Wednesday. They should have done their research, Gomez agreed cheerfully. Now. The hearing is in 4 days. I have 17 law degrees, 19, Morticia said. 19, thank you, my love, 19 law degrees, and while none of them are specifically in magical law, I have spent the last 4 hours reading the Wizengamot Charter of 1707 and the associated amendments, and I can say with confidence that their procedural framework has more holes in it than Pugsley's last project. Pugsley looked up from his dinner with innocent pride. I want legal pads. I want ink. I want someone to telegram ahead and inform this ministry that Gomez Addams will be representing Harry Potter at this hearing and that they should prepare accordingly. He stood up. Also, I want to know everything about this basilisk. The telegram did not go to the ministry, as it turned out, because the ministry did not have a telegram address. What it did have was an owl postal system, and when Gomez discovered this, through a contact of his who worked in what could generously be described as an unofficial information brokerage and less generously as something Interpol had been trying to document for years, he adapted immediately. The letter he sent was 12 pages long, written in 3 colors of ink, cited 47 legal precedents across 6 different wizarding jurisdictions, and concluded with a paragraph that the ministry's head of magical law enforcement would later describe, privately, to a colleague, as the most politely threatening document I have ever received in 30 years of legal practice. It arrived at the ministry on Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, Cornelius Fudge had read it twice and called an emergency meeting. Fudge was not, at his core, a complicated man. He liked order. He liked control. He liked the feeling of sitting behind a large desk in a large office wearing a large hat and knowing that the world was proceeding according to his preferences. He had built a career on the careful cultivation of these preferences, on knowing which people to flatter and which people to ignore and which people to quietly bury under enough bureaucratic procedure that they eventually gave up and went home. Harry Potter had been threatening to become a complication for 2 years now, and this hearing was meant to resolve that. A clean, quiet censure. A reminder that the ministry held authority over all magical matters, including 12-year-old boys with hero complexes and dangerous friends. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would make the papers look badly at him. The letter from Gomez Addams had used the phrase, gross procedural misconduct, 11 times, reckless endangerment of a minor by the state, 7 times, and I am looking forward to meeting you in court, exactly once, at the very end, in handwriting that managed to convey enthusiasm in a way that Fudge found deeply, irrationally alarming. Who is this man? He demanded of Percy Weasley, who had been assigned to research the name because Percy Weasley was the kind of young man who could be relied upon to do thorough work and also to not ask too many questions. Percy consulted his notes. Gomez Addams, sir. American. Extremely wealthy, the precise figure is difficult to establish because several of his assets appear to exist in jurisdictions that may not be entirely, conventional. He has 19 law degrees, though 2 of them appear to be from Percy squinted at his notes, institutions whose accreditation status is unclear. He has appeared as legal counsel in 43 cases across 9 countries. He has won all 43. He has 3 citations for contempt of court, all of which were overturned on appeal, 2 of them by courts that were initially the ones citing him. He is distantly related to the Black family through the Black family. Fudge's voice shifted. A peripheral branch, sir. The connection is through a squib line. The family has no recorded magical ability in the last 2 generations. Except, Percy hesitated. There's a notation here about his wife. Morticia Addams, née Frump. The Frump family has some historical connection to, he stopped. To what, Weasley? Percy looked up from his notes. To some rather old and not entirely documented branches of magic, sir. The records aren't clear. The Unspeakables have a file on the Frump family name, but it's sealed at level 6 clearance. Fudge stared at him. Level 6. Yes, sir. The silence that followed was the particular kind that happens when a bureaucrat realizes that a situation he had classified as minor nuisance has quietly reclassified itself as something requiring a different folder entirely. Cancel my afternoon appointments, Fudge said. And get me Lucius Malfoy. Lucius Malfoy listened to everything Fudge said, then looked at the letter, then looked back at Fudge. His expression throughout was one of measured consideration, the kind that concealed whatever he was actually thinking behind a mask so polished it could have been used as a mirror. You're concerned, he said. I am not concerned, Lucius, I am. Fudge stopped. I am approaching this with appropriate caution. The hearing proceeds as planned, Lucius said. This man is a Muggle with legal ambitions. Our courtroom, our rules, our procedure. Whatever he thinks he knows about the Wizengamot Charter, we have sat on that court for decades. He has not. He will be out of his depth the moment he walks through the door. He cited the 1707 Charter. Specifically Section 14, regarding the right of a minor to Cornelius. Lucius's voice was patient in the way that a sharp blade is patient. The boy needs to be censured. The story around the chamber needs to be controlled. Harry Potter cannot be allowed to emerge from his second year at Hogwarts looking like a hero again, not when the Ministry has been unable to explain what was happening in those dungeons for the better part of a year. We need him diminished. We need Dumbledore's credibility attached to Potter's diminishment. He folded his hands. One American solicitor with too many law degrees is not going to change that. Fudge took a long breath. You're right. Of course you're right. I usually am, said Lucius, and stood to leave. At the door, he paused. Do find out everything you can about the family before Thursday, Cornelius. Knowledge is courtesy. Nothing more. He left without waiting for an answer. The Addams family arrived in London on Thursday morning. They took up 3 compartments on the overnight train from Southampton, having crossed the Atlantic on a ship that the crew would discuss for many years afterward in the careful, understated tones of people describing something they're not entirely sure they believe themselves. Pugsley had befriended the boiler room staff. Fester had discovered that 3 of the sailors were amateur electricians, with predictable results. Lurch had stood at the bow for most of the crossing, and 2 passing vessels had changed course as a precaution. Wednesday had spent the crossing reading everything she could find about Harry Potter. There was more than she expected, actually. The Wizarding Press had been documenting the boy since he was a year old. She'd found a contact through her father's network who dealt in rare publications, and the stack of old Wizarding newspapers she'd worked through between Southampton and London had painted an interesting portrait. The boy who lived. The chosen one. A year old when Voldemort tried to kill him, and whatever had happened that night had somehow reversed the killing curse, a thing that, as far as Wednesday could determine from the limited technical literature she'd obtained, should not be possible. Then 10 years of silence, living with Muggles. Then 2 years at Hogwarts, each year somehow managing to exceed the previous year's incident count. Chamber of Secrets. Basilisk. A 12-year-old boy who had gone down into the dark when every sensible person was running up, because there was a girl who needed finding. Wednesday set the last newspaper down and looked out the window at the English countryside sliding past in the grey morning light. She had met very few people in her life who she found genuinely interesting. She was beginning to think she might be about to meet one. The Ministry of Magic's entrance on the Muggle side was a telephone box on a London street that looked like every other London street, which Wednesday thought showed a distinct lack of imagination. Her father, however, beamed at it with the delight of a man for whom a secret door is always cause for celebration. "Marvelous," he said. "Completely absurd, but marvelous." They had been expected, or rather, the ministry had been informed they were coming, which is not quite the same thing. A harried young clerk named Bartholomew Finch Fletchley had been dispatched to meet them at the entrance and escort them to the appropriate level, a task for which he had prepared extensively and which he immediately began to feel had not prepared him enough. The first problem was the luggage. The Addams family traveled with an amount of luggage that suggested they were either relocating permanently or preparing for an extended siege, and much of it was making sounds. The second problem was the family themselves. Bartholomew had been briefed. American family, Muggle connections, here for the Potter hearing. He had pictured something manageable. What arrived instead was Gomez Addams at the head of the group, moving with the absolute confidence of a man who has never once walked into a room he wasn't immediately the most interesting thing in, wearing a suit so precisely cut it looked like it had been designed specifically to make every other suit in the vicinity feel inadequate. Behind him was his wife, who was tall and pale and beautiful in the specific way that caused Bartholomew to immediately look at the floor, not because she was immodest but because she had the quality of something that, like a solar eclipse, should not be looked at directly for extended periods. Then the children. A boy about 14 who was carrying something under his coat that shifted periodically. A girl about 13 who looked at the ministry building with an expression of clinical assessment that Bartholomew associated with his superior officers right before they declared something a problem. Then a man who appeared to be the father's uncle, whose head was producing a faint but unmistakable glow, and who clapped Bartholomew on the shoulder with a hand that conducted a small but definitive static charge through his entire body and said, "Love what you've done with the place. Very damp. You can really feel the history." Then something very large that Bartholomew decided, for the sake of his continued well-being, to simply classify as a member of staff. "Mr. Addams," Bartholomew managed. "Welcome to the Ministry of Magic." "If you'll all follow me, wonderful," Gomez said, and swept forward so that Bartholomew had to move quickly to stay ahead of him, which he suspected was not accidental. "Tell me, son, Bartholomew, is it? What can you tell me about the composition of today's Wizengamot panel? Specifically, I'm curious about whether the minister himself will be presiding or whether he's delegated to a senior undersecretary. The charter is somewhat ambiguous on, I'm afraid I don't have that information, sir, no matter. We'll find out when we get there." Gomez paused to examine a corridor portrait, which examined him back with visible unease. "What a marvelous place. Tish, look at this architecture. Beautifully gloomy. These people understand atmosphere." Morticia paused beside a particularly dark painting of a stormy sea. "The bureaucratic decor is trying too hard," she said. "But there's something underneath it. Old and rather interesting." She looked up at the ceiling thoughtfully. "We're below street level." "We are, ma'am," Bartholomew said. "The courtroom levels are further, I can feel it," Morticia said, still looking at the ceiling. Then she smiled, which did nothing to make Bartholomew feel better, and moved on. Behind her, Wednesday had paused at a door marked Department of Mysteries and was looking at it with an expression of profound interest. "Not today," said her father, without turning around. "I wasn't going to," the thought was clear on your face. Wednesday filed the door away and kept walking. Harry Potter had been sitting in the waiting area outside courtroom 10 for 27 minutes. He'd arrived early because the alternative was arriving late, and arriving late felt like handing them another charge to add to the list. The corridor was cold and dim and the kind of quiet that feels intentional, like silence being used as a statement. The benches were hard. The torches on the wall gave light without warmth. Somewhere further down the corridor, behind a door that was very definitely locked, something shifted in the dark. He'd been trying not to think about what the courtroom was going to look like. He'd been failing. He knew enough, from Hermione, from the books she'd made him read, from the way Ron had gone carefully quiet when the letter arrived, to know that this wasn't going to be like a school hearing. The Wizengamot was the Supreme Court of Wizarding Britain. Full robes. Full panel. The kind of setting that was designed, in every particular, to make the person in the center of it feel small. He was already feeling small. He was 12 years old, sitting alone on a bench in a basement corridor, and in approximately 33 minutes a room full of people in purple robes were going to decide whether his time at Hogwarts was over. The worst part wasn't the fear, though the fear was present. The worst part was the familiar quality of it, the sense of being in trouble for something that wasn't his fault, of being summoned to answer for things beyond his control, of sitting in a cold corridor and waiting for adults to decide what happened to him next. It was Vernon Dursley's hallway with better lighting and more stationery. He heard them before he saw them. Not loudly, it wasn't that. It was more that the quality of the corridor changed. The sound of footsteps that didn't sound like they were approaching with any particular deference to where they were. A voice, a man's voice, rich and enthusiastic, carrying on a conversation about architecture with the specific delight of someone on holiday. A woman's voice, low and unhurried, responding with something that made the man laugh. Then they came around the corner. Harry looked up. The man in front was everything that this corridor was designed to suppress. Dark suit, enormous smile, the kind of energy that filled a space before he'd finished entering it. He was gesturing as he walked, illustrating some point to a woman beside him who moved like weather, inevitable, elegant, absolutely unconcerned with anything that might try to stop her. Behind them, a boy about Harry's age who was looking at the corridor's stones with the expression of someone evaluating them for structural weakness. And behind him, a girl about his age, who was looking at Harry. Not in the way people usually looked at Harry, the curiosity, the recognition, the calculation of what proximity to him might cost them. This was different. She was looking at him the way he imagined someone might look at an unusual specimen they'd been told about but hadn't seen in person yet. Precise and considering and, underneath it, something that might almost be approval. Then the man at the front saw Harry and stopped moving. "Harry," he said. Harry stood up, partly because it seemed right and partly because the man had the kind of presence that made sitting down feel like a disadvantage. "Yes." The man crossed the corridor in about 4 steps, extended his hand, and shook Harry's with the grip of someone who had never in his life given a half-hearted handshake. "Gomez Addams. Your mother was my cousin, distant, we'll explain the specifics later, the family tree is both extensive and occasionally controversial. I'm going to be representing you today." He paused. "With your permission, of course." Harry stared at him. "You're my, what?" "Cousin." Distantly. Gomez turned. "Morticia, my love." The woman came forward and looked at Harry with an expression that was warm in the specific way that very deep water is warm. It required you to go further in than you expected. "You look like her," she said, and her voice made it sound like this was a significant fact. "Around the eyes. Like my mother." "Yes." She said it simply and moved to stand beside her husband without any further elaboration, as though this information was complete in itself. "I'm Wednesday," said the girl. "Harry," said Harry, because there was nothing else to say. "I know." She looked at him steadily. "You killed a 60-foot basilisk with a sword." Yes. While already poisoned." "Well, the phoenix, while already poisoned," she repeated, as though he had not spoken. There was something in her voice that was not quite admiration but was adjacent to it in a way that was somehow more uncomfortable than admiration would have been. "We're going to see the chamber afterward." "After the hearing?" "After the hearing," she confirmed, and turned away as though this was decided. The boy, Pugsley, gave Harry a cheerful wave. The large man at the back made a sound that Harry's brain filed under greeting and left it there. "Now then," said Gomez, turning back to Harry with his hands clasped, his eyes bright, his whole manner that of a man who has been given the best possible gift, "tell me everything. Start with the diary." Harry told him everything. He told it fast and without editing, the way you do when someone is paying actual close attention and you haven't had enough experience with that to pace yourself through it. The diary. Ginny. The chamber opening, the petrifications, the faculty panic, Lockhart. Going down. Finding her. Tom Riddle and the strange terrible conversation in the dark, the deliberate and creeping theft of her life for his own preservation. The snake. The sword. Fawkes. Gomez listened to all of it without interrupting, which Harry found unusual. He stood against the corridor wall with his arms folded, and his expression shifted several times, amusement, fury, brief but intense, when Harry described Lockhart's attempt to wipe their memories, something close to grief when Harry described Tom Riddle explaining what had happened to Ginny, and then, at the end, when Harry described the sword coming out of the sorting hat, a smile that was large and complicated and appeared to mean several things at once. "All right," Gomez said. "All right?" Harry said. "All right." He straightened up. "Do you know what they actually have against you? Not the formal charges, what they actually want to use this hearing for?" Harry looked at him. "To make me look dangerous. Closer. They want to control the story. They want Harry Potter, who has now, for the second consecutive year, done something impossible and come out alive, to be a liability rather than a hero. They want Dumbledore, who they seem to find deeply inconvenient, attached to that liability." He smiled. "They have built their entire case on the assumption that you have no one in that courtroom who understands what they're doing." He adjusted his jacket cuffs. "They are about to discover their error." From down the corridor, a door opened. A ministry official in Wizengamot robes looked out, saw the group, looked at his clipboard, looked at the group again, and then said, in the tone of someone whose morning has taken an unexpected turn, "Mr. Potter. The Wizengamot is ready. Are all these people, my legal representation?" Harry said, and surprised himself completely with how steadily he said it. The official looked at Gomez. Gomez smiled at him with the full voltage of it, the kind of smile that announces, without any ambiguity, that the person wearing it is having a wonderful time and intends to continue having a wonderful time regardless of what happens next. The official looked back at his clipboard. Back at the group. Back at his clipboard. "Right," he said, in a voice that had gone slightly hollow. "If you'll all, follow me." Gomez clapped Harry once on the shoulder as they walked. It was the kind of clap that meant "I've got you," and Harry, who had been sitting alone in a cold corridor for half an hour waiting for the world to decide what to do with him, felt something shift in his chest that he didn't quite have words for yet. They walked. The corridor opened. Somewhere ahead of them, behind another door, he could hear the murmur of a full Wizengamot panel settling into their seats. Gomez was already composing his opening statement in his head. Harry could tell by the way his lips were moving slightly, the way his eyes had taken on a particular brightness, the way he moved like someone walking towards something he'd been looking forward to for a long time. Wednesday fell into step beside Harry. "Are you frightened?" she asked. Harry considered lying. Then considered who he was talking to. "A bit," he said. "You?" She looked at him as though this was a very strange question to ask her. "No," she said. "But I'm not the one on trial." A pause. "Yet." "What does that mean?" "It means," she said, "that it very much depends on how they conduct themselves in the next few hours." The door to courtroom 10 opened ahead of them. Harry Potter walked through it. Behind him, the Addams family followed, and the torches on the walls, which had been burning low and cold, seemed briefly to burn brighter, the way fire does when something new enters a room and takes up all the oxygen. Chapter 2, The Courtroom 10 had been designed to intimidate. This was not incidental. It was architectural policy. The room descended in tiers, the Wizengamot seated high on all sides in curved rows, their plum-colored robes with the silver W embroidery arranged like a parliament of ravens on telephone wire, and at the bottom, in the center, a single chair with chains bolted to its arms. The lighting came from above, which meant the person in that chair sat in a column of light while everyone judging them receded into comfortable shadow. The ceiling was low enough to suggest weight. The walls were old stone, the kind that had absorbed centuries of verdicts and had no particular warmth to offer about any of them. Harry knew about the chair from Arthur Weasley, who'd mentioned it once in passing with the tone of someone who hoped the subject would not require further discussion. The chains were for violent offenders, apparently. For dangerous criminals. They sat there coiled and waiting, not currently active, but present enough to say something about what kind of room this was. He sat down in it anyway, because there was nothing else to do, and the chains didn't move. The Wizengamot was already assembled. 50-odd witches and wizards, most of them older, most of them wearing expressions that had been carefully arranged to project impartiality and projected instead the specific blankness of people who have already decided what they think and are waiting for the formalities to catch up. Cornelius Fudge sat at the center of the upper tier, directly above the chair, which Harry gathered was intentional. He was a round man with a round face and a lime green bowler hat that he wore with the conviction of someone who considered it distinguished. Beside him, in the senior undersecretary's position, sat a woman Harry had never seen before, small, pink cardigan, with a smile that lived only in her mouth and did not involve any other part of her face. She had a clipboard. She appeared to enjoy having a clipboard in the way that certain people enjoy having small measures of official power over other people's bad days. Fudge cleared his throat. This session of the Wizengamot is convened to address charges brought against Harry James Potter, age 12, regarding, one moment. Fudge stopped. The voice had come from the entrance. Gomez Addams was still in the doorway, he'd paused there rather than entering, in the specific manner of someone who wants the room to have a moment to understand what is about to happen. He had a leather case under one arm and a yellow legal pad under the other, and he walked down the aisle between the gallery benches with the long, unhurried stride of a man who has decided that this room belongs to him now and is simply waiting for everyone else to catch up to that fact. Behind him came Morticia, who moved through the courtroom the way a tide moves through a cave, without urgency and without any question that it will reach everywhere eventually. Behind her came Wednesday, carrying a notebook. Behind her came Pugsley, who was looking at the chains on Harry's chair with an expression of genuine professional interest. Fester brought up the rear, looked around the courtroom with immense satisfaction, and said, at full volume, "Lovely. Very dungeony. You can really feel the despair in the stones, to no one in particular," and then sat down in the gallery bench nearest the door with the comfort of a man settling into his favorite chair. The Wizengamot watched all of this happen. Fudge watched Gomez reach the floor of the courtroom and set his case down on the small table that had been placed there, for the accused convenience, which meant it was smaller than it should have been and positioned to look slightly ridiculous, and then straighten up and look at the assembled panel with an expression of pure, radiant pleasure. Cornelius Fudge, Gomez said, and managed to make his name sound like the opening of a very interesting story. "I've been looking forward to this." Fudge leaned forward. "Who exactly are you?" "Gomez Addams. I'll be representing Harry Potter today." He set his legal pad on the table, uncapped a pen, and looked back up. "I sent a letter, as I imagine you know. I trust you've had time to review the procedural concerns I raised." "We have reviewed your letter," said the pink cardigan woman, and her voice had the precise quality of someone who enjoys reviewing things and finding them wanting. "And while we appreciate," she drew the word out slightly, "your enthusiasm for the process, this is a Wizengamot proceeding. Legal representation in this court is typically provided by certified wizarding solicitors." "Typically," Gomez agreed pleasantly. Section 12 of the 1707 Charter, however, allows any accused party to appoint a representative of their choosing, and the only requirement is that the representative present valid credentials. "Which I have." He opened the leather case, produced a document, and placed it on the table without looking at it. 19 law degrees, admission to the bar in 11 countries, and, he reached back into the case, a letter of endorsement from the International Confederation of Wizards Legal Affairs Division, who I contacted Tuesday morning and who were very helpful. A murmur ran through the Wizengamot. Fudge's expression shifted in a way that he controlled quickly but not quite quickly enough. The International Confederation, issued it under the Accord of 1823, which established minimum standards for the treatment of accused parties in national magical tribunals. Specifically, it addresses the right to non-magical counsel when no certified wizarding solicitor has been made available by the court. He smiled. I noticed that no such solicitor was assigned to Mr. Potter prior to today. That's actually the first procedural issue I wanted to address. The murmur in the Wizengamot became something with more texture to it. The pink-cardiganed woman, Umbridge, Harry would later learn her name was Umbridge, a name he would come to associate with the specific quality of institutional malice dressed in pastel, cleared her throat with a small, deliberate sound. The offer of representation was implicit in the hearing process. Implicit is not the same as provided, Gomez said, still pleasantly. If it would help, I can give you the specific case law. Goldstein v. The Wizengamot, 1891, in which an accused which successfully argued that implicit is not the same as provided, in a case that went all the way to the ICW and resulted in a formal censure of the British Ministry's legal process. He paused. I believe you're aware of it. It's on page 4 of the letter I sent. Silence. Fudge looked at Umbridge. Umbridge looked at her clipboard. On her clipboard, Harry noticed from his chair, she appeared to be writing something but was not, in fact, writing anything. The pen was moving but the clipboard was tilted slightly away from her, the gesture of someone who needs to look busy while they think. Very well, Fudge said, because there was nothing else to say without creating a procedural issue in the first 5 minutes of the proceedings, and even Fudge could see that creating a procedural issue in the first 5 minutes of the proceedings was the kind of thing that ended up in newspaper articles with unflattering headlines. Mr. Addams will be permitted to act as representative. We will proceed with the reading of charges. Wonderful, Gomez said, and sat down beside Harry. How are you doing? He murmured, without looking away from the panel. Better, Harry said, which surprised him a little. Good. When I stand up, you sit still. When I ask you a question, answer it exactly as you told me in the corridor, nothing more, nothing less, and no apologizing. You have nothing to apologize for. Are we clear? Clear, Harry said. Excellent. Gomez uncapped his pen and wrote something on the legal pad. When Harry glanced at it sideways, it read, in very neat handwriting, opening gambit, procedural challenge composition of panel. Expected response, deflection. Counter, Section 7, Article 3. Under that, he'd written, note, Fudge is nervous. Umbridge is smarter. Watch Umbridge. Harry looked up at the panel. At Umbridge, specifically. She was smiling at him with the expression of someone who was very good at smiling and used it as a tool rather than a sentiment. He looked back at the legal pad. Watched Umbridge was underlined. The charges were read by a clerk who stood at a lectern to the side and read them in the tone of someone reciting a very long shopping list, technically engaged but emotionally elsewhere. Harry James Potter was charged with unauthorized use of magic in a Muggle-inhabited area, namely, the Dursley residence, where the first incident involving a hover charm had taken place. Harry thought briefly of Dobby and felt a surge of complex feeling that he pushed down for the moment. Conduct resulting in the endangerment of Muggle-born students through negligent engagement with a Class XXXXX magical creature. Failure to report dangerous magical activity to ministry-appointed authorities. In a timely manner, and interference with an ongoing ministry investigation into said creature. The last charge made something in Harry's chest tighten with a specific, hot anger, because there had been no ministry investigation. There had been nothing from the ministry at all except silence and Fudge visiting Hagrid and sending him to Azkaban and looking pleased about it, and the idea that this was now being characterized as interference with their work was. Gomez wrote something on the legal pad without looking up. Harry read it. It said, "I know. Save it." And then, underneath, "Your face is very expressive. Worth knowing." Harry made his face neutral with some effort. The clerk finished. Fudge folded his hands. "The Wizengamot has reviewed the preliminary evidence and finds sufficient grounds to, before we proceed to findings," Gomez said, standing up, "I'd like to raise a question of panel composition." Fudge stopped. Panel composition is not. Section 7 of the 1707 Charter establishes that a Wizengamot panel sitting in judgment of a minor must be comprised of no fewer than 3 members who have no prior financial or familial conflict of interest with the case. He looked up at the panel. "I count, from my preliminary research, and I apologize, I only had 4 days, so this list may be incomplete, 7 members of this panel who have either directly or through their family seats voted on matters that affected the Hogwarts school administration in the past 3 years. 2 of those votes were specifically regarding budget allocations that Harry Potter's presence at Hogwarts influenced." He consulted the legal pad. "Additionally, I note the presence of Alderman Greengrass, who sits on the board of an investment group that holds shares in Flourish and Blots, whose sales of defense materials to Hogwarts families have been materially affected by the events of this year. And I see Lord Selwyn, whose nephew sits in the same year as Mr. Potter at Hogwarts and whose family has made on-record statements regarding Mr. Potter that suggest a conflict of, this is," Fudge started. "A completely valid procedural objection under Section 7, Article 3, Gomez said. "I'm not asking for the panel to be dismissed. I'm creating a formal record that these conflicts exist, so that should any finding be made today, those findings can be reviewed by the ICW with full knowledge of the panel's composition." He sat back down. "That's all. Please continue." The murmur in the Wizengamot had changed quality again. Harry looked up at the faces and caught something he hadn't expected, not just discomfort, but the particular discomfort of people who are used to the rules existing as a backdrop rather than as something with teeth. Fudge was red around the collar. He looked at Umbridge, who looked at her clipboard, and this time Harry could see that she actually was writing something. "The panel's composition," Fudge said, with careful precision, "is at the minister's discretion." "Also noted for the record," Gomez said, without looking up from his legal pad. They called the first witness. Argus Filch, caretaker of Hogwarts, appeared via some form of magical projection, a shimmer of the sort that suggested either significant magical expenditure or a very overcrowded flow connection, and took the witness space looking aggrieved in the specific way that Filch always looked aggrieved, as though the world had been personally unpleasant to him and intended to continue. He testified about the discovery of the first petrified student, the state of the corridors, the message on the wall. The prosecutor, a ministry official whose name Harry didn't catch, led him through it efficiently, building toward the suggestion that the events had been characterized by panic and insufficient response, and that a student with prior knowledge of dark creatures might have, Mr. Filch. Wednesday had stood up. Everyone looked at her. She was standing in the gallery bench behind the defense table, notebook open, pen in hand, looking at the projection of Filch with the cool attention of someone conducting a clinical interview. "Who is?" the prosecutor began. "My associate," Gomez said. "She's a child, she is 13 and she has been observing this proceeding in an official capacity since we entered the room, which is permitted under the same Section 12 provision that permits my own presence." He looked at the prosecutor pleasantly. "Did you read the charter?" The prosecutor looked at Fudge. Fudge, whose instinct for when to fight a battle he was losing had been activated at some point in the last 20 minutes, made a small gesture that meant let it go. Wednesday looked back at Filch. "Mr. Filch. When you discovered the first petrified student, what were the physical conditions of the area? Temperature, moisture, air quality?" Filch blinked. What does that have to do with, please answer the question." "Cold," he said, with the slightly stunned expression of a man who expected hostility and received professional directness instead. "Damp. Near the second-floor girls' bathroom. There's always moisture near that bathroom, the ghost there, she floods it regular." "Was there any unusual odor?" "There's always unusual odors in this school," an odor specifically consistent with a large reptile? Musky, organic, slightly sulfuric. A pause. I suppose, yes, actually. I noticed it but thought it was a drain backing up. How long before the petrification incident had you noticed this odor? Months, I'd say. Could have been longer. Hard to tell with the bathroom. Wednesday wrote something in her notebook. So the creature had been moving through the castle walls, likely through the plumbing system, for months before the first attack. Which would suggest that its movements were deliberate, contained, and deliberately concealed. She looked up. This is not consistent with a student releasing a creature at random. This is consistent with a creature that was being directed. She sat down. The courtroom was very quiet. The prosecutor, who had been building toward negligent student with dangerous creature knowledge, was looking at Wednesday with an expression that suggested his morning had taken a professional turn he hadn't anticipated. Gomez had written something else on the legal pad. Harry looked at it. That's my girl. The second witness was a healer from St. Mungo's who had treated several of the petrified students, and he testified about the nature of basilisk-induced petrification, the specific signature of the venom in the magical core, the difference between full petrification and reflection-induced petrification. The prosecutor used this to pivot to the argument that a student with access to such a creature constituted a danger to the school community. Gomez handled this one personally. Healer Thorne, he said, standing. You mentioned the difference between direct gaze and reflected gaze petrification. In the cases you treated, which type were all the incidents? Reflected, the healer said. All of them. Yes. Not a single case of direct basilisk gaze. Correct. Meaning that in every single incident of petrification this year, the victims survived because they encountered the basilisk indirectly, through reflections, through intermediary surfaces. Gomez paused. Now, a basilisk whose keeper wants to cause maximum damage would be directed to make direct eye contact with its victims. Would it not? Logically, yes. But every victim lived. Every victim. Despite a creature that could have killed instantly choosing not to. He let that sit in the air for a moment. Does that sound like a student using a dangerous creature as a weapon? Or does it sound like a creature whose controller was attempting to terrorize without killing? The healer looked at the prosecutor. The prosecutor looked at his notes. I object to the speculative nature of, it's a medical question, Gomez said. Is it medically consistent with controlled, deliberate non-lethal engagement? Yes, the healer said. Technically, yes. Thank you. Gomez sat down. I have no further questions. He wrote 3 words on the legal pad and slid it toward Harry. Their case collapses. Harry looked up at Fudge, who was leaning toward Umbridge and speaking quietly. Whatever he said made Umbridge nod once, slowly, and make a note. From the gallery, Morticia watched all of this with the patience of someone who has all the time in the world and is simply watching events arrange themselves into the shape she already knew they would take. Beside her, Pugsley was examining the bench he was sitting on and had identified 3 separate structural weaknesses, which he was cataloging for future reference. It was the third witness who changed the room. Lucius Malfoy had not been on the witness list. Harry saw Gomez notice this, a fractional pause, a recalibration, when Fudge announced, with deliberate smoothness, that he was calling a special witness who had information material to the question of how the basilisk came to be in the school at all. Lucius entered the courtroom the way he entered most rooms, as though the room had been arranged for his arrival. White blonde hair, silver-tipped cane, a fur-trimmed robe that cost more than most people's furniture. He moved to the witness space and looked out at the gallery with an expression of mild, aristocratic patience, the kind that implies the proceedings are going exactly as he planned because they are. Harry's hands tightened under the table. Gomez, very quietly, under his breath, said, interesting. Lucius testified about the climate of fear at Hogwarts this year. About the failures of school leadership, specifically Dumbledore's leadership, to contain the crisis. About the concerns that parents had raised, concerns that his position as a school governor had obligated him to take seriously. About the question of what it meant for a 12-year-old boy to have knowledge of, and access to, areas of the school that should have been sealed for decades. He was good at it. Harry had to give him that. He was careful, measured, and never once said anything that could be cleanly disproven, threading instead the specific kind of insinuation that doesn't constitute accusation but creates impressions anyway. "Mr. Malfoy," Gomez said, when Lucius finished. "Mr. Addams." Lucius looked at him with the expression of a man encountering an unexpected obstacle and deciding, provisionally, how much of an obstacle it actually is. "You sit on the Hogwarts Board of Governors." "I do." "You voted, this year, to suspend Professor Dumbledore from his position as headmaster." "Along with the rest of the board, yes." "Under what specific provision of the Hogwarts Governance Charter?" Lucius smiled slightly. "Section 9, concerning the headmaster's duty of care to enrolled students, specifically regarding, interesting. Because Section 9 requires a unanimous vote of the board to invoke the suspension clause, and I understand one of the 12 governors, a Mrs. Arabella Figg, acting for the Hogsmeade district, was not present for that vote. Was she notified?" A pause. "Very small. Someone who wasn't watching for it would have missed it. Standard procedure allows for a majority vote in, Section 9 specifies unanimous," Gomez said. "Not majority. Unanimous. I have a copy of the charter here if it would assist your memory." He produced it from the leather case. He placed it on the table. He did not look away from Lucius. Lucius looked back at him. The slight smile had not changed in its surface quality, but something behind it had shifted, an adjustment, a reassessment, the look of a chess player who has found, 3 moves in, that their opponent is rather better than they appeared. "I defer to the written record," Lucius said, smoothly. "I appreciate that." Gomez made a note. "One more question. You were, as a school governor, presumably aware of the school's history, including the historical accounts of Salazar Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets. An underground chamber purpose-built to house a basilisk, created by one of the school's founders. Historical accounts can be, yes or no, Mr. Malfoy. You were aware of the historical accounts?" A fractional pause. "I was aware that certain historical accounts, yes or no?" "Yes." "You were aware that a chamber existed, designed to house a basilisk, within Hogwarts. And yet at no point during this year's crisis did you bring this historical information to the Ministry's attention or suggest that it might be relevant to the investigation." Gomez capped his pen. "Why not?" The silence in the courtroom was the specific kind that happens when a question lands differently than the room expected. Lucius Malfoy looked at Gomez Addams. His expression was still composed, still aristocratic, still completely controlled. But his eyes were doing something different from his face, and Gomez was looking at his eyes. "I didn't believe the historical accounts were credible," Lucius said, finally. "And yet they were." Gomez nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Malfoy. That's all I have for now." "For now." The 2 words fell into the room with a weight that was entirely disproportionate to their size. Lucius stepped down from the witness space with the same fluid composure he'd arrived with. But when he passed the defense table, his eyes went to Harry for just a moment, a flat, assessing look, and then to Gomez, and in that look Harry saw something he recognized from the Chamber of Secrets, from the moment Tom Riddle had stopped pretending. Recalculation. Fudge called a recess. This was presented as procedural, allowing the panel to review documents, but Harry could see it for what it was. Fudge needed 15 minutes to talk to his people and figure out how this had gone sideways so quickly. He disappeared through a door at the back of the upper tier with Umbridge, moving briskly and not looking down. Gomez stretched, cracked his knuckles, and looked thoroughly satisfied. "You rattled Malfoy," Harry said. "I rattled Fudge. Malfoy I intend to dismantle, but that's a longer project." Gomez glanced across the room to where Lucius had settled in the gallery with a bland expression and what appeared to be a quiet conversation with Alderman Greengrass. He knew about the chamber. He either knew the accounts were real and said nothing, or he knew more than the accounts and said nothing. Either way, the question is now in the record. He's not on trial, Harry said. No. But questions don't need a trial to do their work. Gomez looked at Harry. How are you actually doing? I feel like, Harry stopped. Tried to organize what he was actually feeling, which was complex. Like the floor is a bit less tilted than it was. Gomez considered this. Good description. He stood, moved toward the gallery rail, and looked up at the Wizengamot members milling about during the recess. These people, he said quietly, are not bad, most of them. They are afraid. The ministry tells them a story about order and safety and the maintenance of the status quo, and they sit in their seats and vote with it because the alternative is to stand up and be the person the ministry points at next time. He turned back to Harry. Fudge understands that. It's the only real power he has. When you remove the fear, the compliance goes with it. Harry thought about that. How do you remove the fear? You show them that the ministry can be wrong, publicly, and the sky doesn't fall. Gomez smiled. That's what this morning has been. The sky isn't falling, Harry. They're adjusting to the idea that it won't. From the gallery, Wednesday had descended to the floor of the courtroom and was standing beside Harry's chair, examining the chains with focused interest. These are standard ministry binding enchantments, she said, without preamble. Probably 4th century. The chain compound has iron pyrite in the alloy, which is interesting because iron pyrite conducts certain organic curses. It's not standard construction for a restraint. She looked at Harry. They were designed for something specific. Not general-purpose criminal restraint. Wednesday, said Harry, who was finding that the best approach to her was simply to stay with the thread she was pulling. What are you saying? I'm saying someone put a lot of thought into this chair before this room was used for regular hearings. She straightened up. I want to look at the records for this courtroom. How old it is. What it was originally used for. The ministry archives might, I'll find them. She said it with the absolute confidence of someone for whom access to secure documents is an obstacle that exists in theory but rarely in practice, and walked back toward the gallery. Morticia, who had been watching the entire proceedings from the gallery in the kind of composed stillness that suggested she was simultaneously present and somewhere else, leaned toward Harry as he turned back to his chair. She touched his shoulder once, briefly. Your mother would have said something very rude about this room, she said. And she would have been right to. Harry found he didn't know what to do with this information, which he suspected was appropriate. When Fudge came back, his color had settled and he had a look on his face that Harry associated with someone who has decided to change tactics. The Wizengamot will hear testimony from Harry Potter himself, Fudge announced. Gomez was already on his feet. The defense welcomes direct examination. However, I'd like to note for the record that in questioning a minor, standard procedure is well established, Umbridge said, with her clipboard and her smile. Mr. Potter will answer the panel's questions directly. Of course he will, Gomez said. And I'll be here to object when those questions stray from the evidentiary scope of the charges as filed, as opposed to becoming a general inquiry into Mr. Potter's character, history, or associations. Just so we're all clear on where the lines are. Fudge leaned forward. Mr. Potter. You went into the Chamber of Secrets of your own volition. Yes, Harry said. Without ministry authorization. There was no ministry presence at Hogwarts during, yes or no, Mr. Potter? Yes, said Harry. You engaged with a Class XXXXX creature. I killed it, Harry said. After it tried to kill me. With a sword. A small sound from somewhere in the gallery that might have been Fester saying that's the boy under his breath. The manner of your engagement, Mr. Fudge. Gomez's voice was even and clear. Are we charging a 12-year-old with self-defense? Because I want to make sure the record reflects that clearly. We are examining whether the situation arose due to a possessed first-year student being used as a vessel for a dark artifact to open a decade-sealed chamber. I have here, Gomez reached into the case, the detailed account from Albus Dumbledore, submitted this morning, of the diary recovered from the chamber. The diary of Tom Riddle, used to possess Ginny Weasley, which was introduced into Hogwarts by a person or persons as yet unidentified. He placed it on the table. The question of how that diary entered Hogwarts is, I would argue, considerably more relevant to the safety of students than the question of whether a 12-year-old boy defended himself and his classmate with appropriate force. The Wizengamot had gone very still. Fudge looked at the document on the table. His jaw was tight. That diary, Gomez continued, pleasantly, is currently in the custody of Dumbledore, who I believe is present in the building today and available for testimony if the panel wishes it. Alternatively, the panel can stay focused on the original charges, which, after this morning's testimony, I believe are demonstrably without merit and should be dismissed. Fudge opened his mouth. With respect, said Gomez. Fudge closed his mouth. From the gallery, Lucius Malfoy was watching the document on the table with an expression that was perfectly composed and perfectly still in the way that a frozen lake is perfectly still and equally capable of cracking without warning. We will recess until this afternoon, Fudge said. Of course, Gomez said. We'll be here. In the corridor outside courtroom 10, during the second recess, Harry ate a sandwich that Morticia had somehow produced from the luggage and sat on the bench where he'd started the morning, except that the bench now felt different, same stone, same cold, same dim corridor, but the quality of sitting there had changed completely. Wednesday sat beside him without asking and opened her notebook. He's going to try something this afternoon, she said. Fudge. Not a legal argument, he doesn't have one. Something political. He's going to call someone who changes the emotional shape of the room. You think so? He went into that recess and immediately sent for someone. I saw the clerk leave. She wrote something. The question is whether it's someone who's supposed to make you look dangerous or someone who's supposed to make my father look dangerous. Harry considered. Does your father look dangerous? Wednesday looked at him sideways. My father is dangerous. That's different from looking it. She paused. He chooses to present himself as enthusiastic and theatrical because it makes people underestimate him until it's too late. Which is also dangerous. What about your mother? Wednesday thought about this. My mother doesn't need to present herself as anything. She simply is what she is and lets people draw their own conclusions. Harry thought about the way Morticia had moved through the courtroom. About the way two of the Wizengamot members in the upper tier had been distinctly unable to look at her for more than a moment and had appeared slightly unwell at various points in the proceedings. She's doing something, he said. To the room. Wednesday looked at him with what might, on another face, have been a smile. Yes, she said. She is. What? Nothing magical, exactly. Or nothing that the ministry could classify as a spell. Wednesday closed her notebook. My mother has a particular quality. It is difficult to explain. She makes people aware, in her presence, of everything they have done that they are not proud of. Not through accusation. Just through existing near them. A pause. Several of the Wizengamot members appear to have quite a lot they're not proud of. Harry looked down at the floor. Then he said, Wednesday. Yes. Thank you. For this morning. The Filch questions. That was, the logical approach to the evidence, she said, in a tone that deflected the gratitude efficiently. Still. He looked at her. Why are you helping? You don't know me. She looked back at him with those steady, dark eyes. You went into the dark for someone else's sake, she said simply. That tells me what I need to know. There was a clatter from further down the corridor. Pugsley had found something structural to examine, and the examination had become interactive. Pugsley, Wednesday called, without raising her voice. The wall was asking for it, Pugsley called back. Leave the wall. It's mostly still a wall. Pugsley. A pause. The sound stopped. Fine, Pugsley said, with the specific resignation of someone who has many other projects. From around the corner, the sound of Fester in enthusiastic conversation with two Aurors who had been sent to monitor the family and had made the mistake of getting close enough to be engaged with. One of them was laughing. The other one sounded genuinely uncertain whether they should be alarmed. Harry looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then at the courtroom door. Then at the thin gap of yellow light underneath it that meant the Wizengamot was still assembled, still deliberating, still arranging the afternoon session that was supposed to finish what the morning had started. He thought about Fudge's face when Gomez had placed Dumbledore's report on the table. The specific quality of a man who has brought a net to catch fish and found that the river contains something considerably larger. He thought about Lucius Malfoy's eyes. He thought about what Wednesday had said, he went into the dark for someone else's sake. He thought about how strange it was to have that said to him plainly, without drama or admiration or the slight uncomfortable edge that compliments from wizarding people usually carried, the weight of expectation attached. She'd said it like a fact. Like the kind of fact you use to establish what someone is, not to make them feel good about it. He wasn't sure yet what to do with that, either. But the afternoon session was going to start in 40 minutes, and Gomez was already back at the defense table with a fresh legal pad, writing. The courtroom door would open again. Harry would walk back through it. This time, he did not feel small. Chapter 3, The Basilisk's Shadow. The afternoon session began at 2 o'clock. Fudge called his new witness at 2:03, which meant he'd had her waiting since before the recess ended, which meant he'd arranged her before the morning session even finished, which meant he'd anticipated needing her before Gomez had said a single word. Gomez noted all of this without expression while writing it down. The witness was Rita Skeeter. She appeared from a side door rather than the main entrance, which was the first signal that this was theater rather than testimony. Side entrances create drama, suggest exclusivity, imply that the witness is important enough to have their own door. She wore robes the color of a bruise and carried a crocodile skin bag large enough to contain either a complete filing system or several smaller crimes, and she moved to the witness space with the specific energy of someone who has been given permission to do something they enjoy and intends to enjoy it completely. Harry recognized her from various copies of the Daily Prophet that had crossed his path over the past 2 years. She had a column. It was read by many people. It was not, as far as Harry could tell from the articles he'd encountered, particularly concerned with what was true versus what would generate the most interesting reaction from breakfast tables across Wizarding Britain. Miss Skeeter, Fudge said, with the warmth of a man extending a professional courtesy he expects returned, you've been investigating the events at Hogwarts this year in your capacity as a special correspondent for the Daily Prophet. I have. Her voice was bright and carried well. She had a quick quotes quill behind her ear that she hadn't deployed yet but whose presence was a statement in itself. And what have you found? She found, it emerged over the next 10 minutes, quite a lot. She had found that the events at Hogwarts this year formed a pattern of dangerous escalation around one particular student. She had found sources, unnamed, naturally, within the school who expressed concern about the unusual frequency of life-threatening situations that clustered around Harry Potter specifically. She had found that a boy of 12 who had now twice in 2 years found himself at the center of incidents that should have been far beyond his years either possessed remarkable luck or possessed something else, something that responsible journalism obligated her to raise as a question, if not to answer definitively. She was very good at it. Harry could feel the room shifting, not dramatically, not in any way that could be pointed to, but in the cumulative way that water shifts soil, slowly and thoroughly. She wasn't saying Harry was dangerous. She was building the architecture of the suggestion so carefully that by the time you realized you were living inside it, the walls had already gone up. Gomez let her finish. He sat with his pen resting on the legal pad, his expression one of polite attention, and he let her finish completely. Then he stood up. Miss Skeeter. You mentioned unnamed sources within Hogwarts. Confidential sources are protected under, I'm not asking you to name them. I'm asking how many. A pause. Several. More than 2. Yes. More than 5. The pause was longer this time. The number is less relevant than the, Miss Skeeter. He said it with the same pleasantness he said everything, which somehow made it land harder. You have appeared in this court as a witness to present evidence that Harry Potter is characterized by dangerous patterns. Your evidence is the assessment of unnamed sources of indeterminate number. Would you say that meets the evidentiary standard for testimony in a formal Wizengamot proceeding? I'm a journalist, not a solicitor. No, you're not, Gomez agreed. So let me ask you some journalistic questions. In your research, did you interview Harry Potter? I submitted a request to the ministry for, yes or no. No. Did you interview any of the students who were petrified this year? The families were, yes or no. No. Did you interview Ginny Weasley, who was the primary victim of the possession incident central to the events of this year? Rita Skeeter's expression had undergone a subtle but definitive change, the kind that happens when someone good at their own game recognizes they're being played at a higher level of it. The family declined, yes or no, Miss Skeeter. No. Did you interview Albus Dumbledore? Professor Dumbledore and I have had our, yes or no. No. Did you interview any of the faculty present during the incidents? No. Did you interview anyone directly involved in the events you are testifying about? A silence. No, she said. So your testimony, Gomez said, is that unnamed sources of indeterminate number, none of whom you've identified, none of whom have been cross-examined, none of whom were necessarily present for the events in question, have given you an impression of a pattern. And you've presented that impression in a legal proceeding as evidence. He sat down. I don't have further questions. Rita Skeeter stepped down from the witness space. She did it without any visible loss of composure, because she was a professional, but she collected her crocodile skin bag with slightly more speed than she'd set it down. From the gallery, Fester watched her leave and said, at perfectly audible volume, that woman has a jar of something in that bag. I can smell it from here. He leaned toward the Auror sitting next to him, who had by now largely abandoned the pretense of monitoring the family and was simply spending time with Fester because the alternative was standing alone in a corridor. Can you smell it? The Auror, whose name was Proudfoot and who had not expected his Tuesday to go this way, said, what kind of something? Not sure. Interesting though. Fester looked satisfied. Very interesting. Fudge called no further witnesses. This was, Harry gathered from the way Gomez's posture shifted slightly when Fudge announced it, not entirely expected. It meant Fudge had decided that his case was either complete or that continuing to build it was making things worse, and from the quality of the morning and early afternoon, Harry suspected it was the latter. The floor moved to summation. The ministry prosecutor went first. He was competent, organized, and presented what he had, which, after the morning's systematic dismantling, was considerably less than he'd arrived with, in the most favorable light he could manage. He talked about the ministry's responsibility to ensure that Hogwarts remained safe. He talked about the importance of proper channels. He talked about a climate of dangerous incidents that demanded regulatory response. He did not, Harry noticed, say very much about Harry specifically, which meant he'd recalibrated the strategy to the one remaining angle that still had ground beneath it. Not Harry Potter is dangerous but the situation demands control, which was harder to argue against because it wasn't really about Harry at all. Gomez let him finish, then stood up. His summation was not long. It lasted 6 minutes. In those 6 minutes, he established, with the methodical precision of someone who has been constructing this particular structure since Tuesday and is placing the final stones with great satisfaction, the following: that every charge in the original filing either mischaracterized the events or attributed responsibility to the wrong party, that the real question, how a dark artifact of significant power came to be in the possession of a first-year Hogwarts student, had been raised and not answered, that this question should, if the Wizengamot was doing its actual job rather than its performative one, be the subject of a full investigation, and that Harry Potter, age 12, had done nothing in the course of this year except act, at considerable personal risk, to protect his classmates in the absence of any adequate institutional response. He sat down. The Wizengamot conferred. Harry watched the murmur pass through the upper tier like a wave, watched faces turn toward each other and away, watched Fudge at the center of it all working his jaw slightly and looking at the document Gomez had placed on the table, Dumbledore's report on the diary, as though it had personally affronted him. Lucius Malfoy was no longer in the gallery. Harry looked around twice to be certain, and Wednesday, who had already noticed, leaned forward from behind and said quietly, left through the side door during the prosecutor's summation. "Where did he go?" "I don't know yet," she said. "My father does." Harry looked at Gomez. Gomez was making notes on the legal pad with the relaxed attention of a man who had been tracking a separate chess game the entire time the courtroom one was being played, and who had just watched the piece he expected to move get picked up and moved exactly where he predicted. He didn't look worried. Harry decided, provisionally, to take some comfort from that. The Wizengamot voted. It was not unanimous. But it was 31-19, in Harry's favor, which was enough. The charges regarding unauthorized use of magic at the Dursley residence, which had been, Harry now understood, the Ministry's strongest procedural ground and the one Fudge had most expected to survive, were dismissed on the grounds that the magic in question had not been performed by Harry at all, a fact that would have been established by 5 minutes of actual investigation. The remaining charges were dismissed as lacking evidentiary basis. Harry Potter was cleared. The word landed in the courtroom with a solidity that Harry hadn't expected, a specific physical quality, as though something that had been held up in the air for a long time had been set down. Gomez stood, shook Harry's hand, and then turned to the Wizengamot with an expression of warm appreciation that managed to also convey, without saying anything remotely antagonistic, that he had expected nothing less and found the 31-19 split informative in ways he would be pursuing through separate channels. Fudge banged his gavel and announced the session adjourned with the energy of someone closing a meeting they wish had gone differently, and the Wizengamot began to disperse. Wednesday was already on her feet. "Now," she said, to Harry, "we're going to the chamber." "The Ministry won't allow it," Harry said. "Probably not," Wednesday agreed, as though this was a bureaucratic detail of moderate relevance rather than a hard wall. "But Professor Dumbledore is in the building, and he is still the headmaster of Hogwarts, which means he has authority over access to the school. The Ministry doesn't." She paused. "Did you see him during the proceedings?" Harry had, in fact, briefly spotted Dumbledore in the gallery toward the end of the morning session, sitting with the particular quality of amused bemusement he seemed to carry as a default setting. They'd made eye contact and Dumbledore had given him a small nod and a look that suggested he was watching the proceedings with considerable interest and approximately no concern, which Harry now understood was either extreme confidence or extremely good faith in the people at the defense table. Probably both. "He was in the gallery," Harry said. "But the session's over and he's in the corridor," said Wednesday, who had apparently been tracking this since the vote. "Talking to your father," she added, to Gomez. Gomez was already moving. Albus Dumbledore stood in the corridor outside courtroom 10 looking precisely as he always looked, unhurried, slightly luminous in the way of very old things that have settled into their own quality of light, and wearing robes that were violet today with small silver moons moving slowly across the fabric. He was in conversation with Gomez, who had apparently introduced himself while Harry and Wednesday were still gathering their things, and the conversation had the distinctive quality of two people who have each, independently, assessed the other as interesting and are now proceeding on that basis. The procedural challenge on panel composition was elegant, Dumbledore was saying, as Harry came into earshot. "I particularly appreciated the Goldstein citation. I hadn't thought of that case in 40 years. The case law is deeply underused," Gomez said. "Most people don't read the charter carefully enough to know it exists. I find that procedural history is like archaeology, fascinating, and occasionally useful for building things. Or dismantling them," Dumbledore said. Preferably both, said Gomez. Dumbledore saw Harry and turned to him with an expression that was warm and specific in the way that his expressions always were, not the general warmth of someone being pleasant but the directed warmth of someone who has been paying close attention. Harry. That was a rather remarkable morning. It was, Harry said. Sir, he stopped, tried to organize the request, then gave up trying to be diplomatic about it. Can we go to the chamber? Dumbledore looked at him. Then at Wednesday. Then back at Harry with an expression that shifted slightly, a consideration, a weighing of something. The ministry has requested that the chamber remain sealed pending an official investigation, he said. How long has that request been pending? Gomez asked. Since the events of June. It is now September, Gomez said. 3 months with no investigative action and no timeline provided. Indeed. Then the investigation is, at best, theoretical, Gomez said. And under the educational governance framework, which places Hogwarts premises under the authority of the headmaster rather than the ministry in non-criminal investigative matters, you've read the governance framework, Dumbledore said. I read everything, Professor. Gomez smiled. Is the access yours to grant? Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then his eyes, which were always doing several things at once behind their half-moon glasses, settled into something like resolution. I believe it is, he said. Though I suspect the ministry will have a perspective on that. He looked at Wednesday. You have specific reasons for wanting to see it. It was not a question. Wednesday didn't treat it like one. The creature was controlled, she said. Directed. The control mechanism, the diary, was recovered, but nobody has asked what else might still be down there. The chamber was Slytherin's personal construction. Slytherin was a Parselmouth with documented interest in both magical creature husbandry and what the historical record calls legacy containment, the idea of leaving behind tools or influences for future use. She paused. The basilisk was one tool. It may not have been the only one. Dumbledore looked at her for a long moment. How old are you? 13. You've done a great deal of research in 4 days. I read quickly, Wednesday said. And I find that most people don't finish their questions. They stop at the first answer and call it sufficient. She looked at him levelly. The chamber was opened. A student was nearly killed. A basilisk is dead. The diary was destroyed. Everyone went home. A pause. Nobody went back to look. The corridor was quiet. Dumbledore said, after a moment, no. Nobody did. They traveled to Hogwarts by Portkey, which Dumbledore arranged with the practiced ease of someone for whom magical logistics are approximately as complicated as hailing a cab, and which deposited them in the entrance hall of Hogwarts with the characteristic sensation that Harry associated with being picked up by the navel and redirected. Pugsley fell over. He seemed to find this interesting rather than unpleasant. Fester remained completely stable, which he announced with satisfaction, and then tried to get the entrance hall portraits to talk to him. Most of them moved to the edges of their frames, which he interpreted as shyness. Hogwarts in early September had the quality of a place between states, the term had barely begun, students were still in the tentative stage of the year, and the castle itself felt like it was still deciding what kind of year this was going to be. The great hall smelled of the morning's breakfast. The staircases moved with their usual arbitrary stubbornness. The stones, which had been absorbing centuries of magical life and had opinions about it all that they kept mostly to themselves, seemed to take brief note of the Addams family's arrival and then continue about their business. Morticia had come, which Harry hadn't quite expected. She moved through the corridors of Hogwarts with the same unhurried quality she moved through everything, but there was something different about her here, a heightened attention, a slight tilt of the head as though the building was saying something to her that she was listening to carefully. She touched a wall once, in passing, and paused. Old, she said, to Gomez. Very, he agreed. Not just old. Layered. There are things here that haven't been disturbed in, she stopped. tilted her head again. A long time. Mother, said Wednesday, from ahead of them. I know, Morticia said, and kept walking. The entrance to the chamber was in the girls' bathroom on the second floor, which struck Gomez as characteristically perverse for a founder with a documented gift for grand gestures, and Pugsley as genius. Actually, nobody would ever look. The bathroom itself was as Harry remembered it, damp, perpetually slightly foggy, a pervasive smell of old water, and moaning Myrtle manifesting almost immediately upon their entry with the specific energy of someone who has been waiting for an audience. She appeared above the sinks in a rush of cold air and the particular sadness she wore like a second uniform, and then she saw Harry and her expression shifted into something considerably more complicated. You came back, she said, in a tone that contained multiple layers of feeling, most of them centered around the idea that his coming back was personally significant to her in ways she had perhaps been thinking about since June. Hi, Myrtle, Harry said. You didn't come back all summer, she said. I waited. The term only just, I know when the term starts, I've been here for 50 years. Her eyes went to the assembled group and her expression shifted again, cycling through several things before settling on uncertain. Who are all these people? Friends, Harry said, and it surprised him again, the ease of saying it. Myrtle looked at Wednesday. Wednesday looked at Myrtle. A moment passed between them that Harry couldn't quite read, an assessment, something mutual. You died here, Wednesday said. In that cubicle, Myrtle confirmed, gesturing. Would you like to see? Later, Wednesday said. The sink first. The chamber entrance opened for Harry the same way it had in June, the snake engraved on the tap responding to Parseltongue, the sink descending, the pipe opening, and looking down at the dark chute that dropped into the dark. Harry felt the specific thing he always felt at the edge of a place like this, not quite fear, not quite calm, but the third thing between them that he'd never found a word for. Wednesday was looking down with what appeared to be genuine anticipation. You've done this before, she said. It wasn't a question. Once, Harry said. You went first. Yes. She looked at him with that considering look. Then you go first again. Harry went first. The chute was as he remembered, cold and fast and smelling of old damp and something that was fundamentally underground, the smell of places that had been closed for a very long time. He landed in the dark corridor buried in bones and detritus, the same mound of old shed snake skin and small animal remains, and stepped aside as the others came down behind him. Gomez arrived with enthusiasm. Pugsley arrived and immediately crouched to examine the bone pile. Morticia arrived and stood upright in the dark corridor with her eyes closed for a moment, and the quality that surrounded her, that emanation of deep and considered awareness, intensified in the underground space in a way that was noticeable even to Harry, who didn't have any particular gift for reading magical atmospheres. Wednesday arrived last. She looked at the tunnel, the torchlight that Harry had created casting long shadows, the walls with their carved serpents, and she was quiet for the first time since Harry had met her. Not the silence of someone with nothing to say. The silence of someone who is paying very close attention to something that merits it. The architecture is Slytherin era, she said, finally. Late 10th century. But these walls, she touched one, have been modified. More recent enchantments layered over the original stonework. She looked at Harry. Someone came here after Slytherin. Not recently. But not 1,000 years ago either. Someone like who? Harry asked. The most recent modifications in this corridor feel to me like mid-20th century work. She looked at Dumbledore, who had made the descent with the ease of someone who has been in a great many difficult places and has feelings about very few of them. When did Tom Riddle attend Hogwarts? Dumbledore looked at her with the expression he'd first had when she said nobody went back to look. The 1940s, he said. He wasn't just opening it, Wednesday said. He was building in it. They reached the chamber itself 20 minutes later, moving through the stone serpent corridors by torchlight with the particular silence of people doing serious work. Pugsley collected 3 separate samples of the shed snakeskin and a fragment of stone inscription, which he catalogued with a thoroughness that suggested he'd done this kind of thing before. Fester, who had come with them largely because the alternative was staying behind in Myrtle's bathroom, discovered that his unique relationship with electrical currents was doing something unusual in the magical stone tunnels and started narrating observations about it to himself under his breath. The chamber proper opened before them. Harry had been here in June and he remembered it, the long dark space, the shallow flooded floor that reflected the torchlight in waves, the great stone pillars carved with intertwined serpents rising to the ceiling, the stone face of Salazar Slytherin at the far end gazing across it all with the expression of a man who built something specifically to be looked up at with awe. He remembered the cold. He remembered the smell, reptile and old stone and something else underneath, something organic and deep. He didn't remember it looking quite this interesting. Morticia had walked 3 steps into the chamber and stopped, and the quality around her was something that even the non-magical members of the Wizengamot had apparently been able to feel, whatever it was, and in here it was, different. Not alarming, exactly. More like the feeling before a thunderstorm, when the air knows something your rational mind hasn't caught up with. "There's something in here," she said. "Still." "The basilisk is dead," Harry said. "Not the basilisk." She moved, slowly, along the left side of the chamber. "Something older. In the walls." She stopped at the second pillar from the back. "Here." Wednesday was already there. The pillar at Morticia's fingertips was, at first glance, identical to the others, carved stone serpents spiraling upward, old and worn and impressive. But Wednesday was looking at the base of it, crouched down, running her fingers along the join between pillar and floor, and she said, "There's a seam here. This pillar is hollow." Harry looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked at the pillar. "I have been in this chamber once before," Dumbledore said quietly. "In June, after the events." The DMLE team's initial survey was brief. A pause. "We were focused on the immediate situation. Nobody went back to look," Wednesday said, echoing herself, without emphasis. "No," said Dumbledore again. Wednesday stood up. She looked at Harry. "Can you ask it to open?" Harry looked at the pillar. The carved serpents on its surface were not decorative, he could see that now. They weren't random scrollwork. They were a pattern, a specific arrangement, and at the center of the arrangement, at about eye height on the pillar, was a single serpent head facing outward, mouth slightly open, and Harry, looking at it, felt the thing he felt when he encountered Parseltongue, not heard it exactly, not thought it, but the meaning arriving in his head before the sound did. "Speak to enter," it said. Or meant. Or was. He spoke. The pillar unsealed from the floor with a sound like something very old being asked to move for the first time in a while and doing so with considerable protest. Stone ground against stone. The seam that Wednesday had found became a gap, then a door, not a room, not a passage, but a cavity in the pillar itself, roughly 2 feet square, and inside the cavity, Harry held up the torch. Morticia made a small sound. Not surprise. Recognition. Inside the cavity were a set of stone tablets, 12 of them, small, dense with carved text in what Harry did not recognize as any writing system he'd encountered. Beside the tablets, wrapped in something that had once been cloth and was now mostly the memory of cloth, were 3 objects, a small phial of black glass sealed with a serpent head stopper, a ring set with a dark stone, and a thin, flat piece of bone on which something had been burnt rather than carved. "These aren't Slytherins," Wednesday said. She was crouching, looking at them without touching. "The tablets are his. But these 3 objects were placed here later. The wrapping is wrong for the period." She looked at the ring. "Someone used this space as a cache." "Riddle," Harry said. "Yes." She looked at the bone piece. "This is a binding. Old dark magic. Something recorded on bone lasts, the text survives things that would destroy paper or even stone." She looked at Dumbledore. "Do you know what it says?" Dumbledore came forward. He crouched beside the cavity and looked at the bone piece for a long time. His face, which was usually some distance away from troubled, did something complicated. "I can read it," he said. He didn't say it immediately. He said it after a moment, the way you say something when you need a moment to be certain you want to say it at all. "It is a record of a working. Incomplete, this is part of something larger." He looked at the file. "And this is, Harry." Harry crouched beside him. "Do not touch this." "Not yet." Dumbledore looked at him directly. "Do you understand what a Horcrux is?" The word landed in the chamber like a stone into deep water. Wednesday's pen was out. She was writing. Harry looked at Dumbledore's face and found something there that he'd never quite seen before, not fear, exactly, because Dumbledore and fear were acquaintances at most, but something adjacent. The specific weight of someone who has been carrying a knowledge that they weren't ready to share yet, and has just had the decision taken from them by events. "No," Harry said. "What is it?" Dumbledore looked at the file. "At the ring. At the bone piece. A method of preserving part of a soul outside the body," he said, in the tone of someone reading a difficult sentence that they've spent a long time preparing to say. "By means of violence. Significant violence. Riddle was here in the 1940s, and he was not merely opening the chamber for the Basilisk. He was using it as a place to work." He paused. "This file, I believe this file is a record of such a working. Not the object itself. The record. Evidence that he had done it." "Done it where?" Harry said. A very long silence. "That," said Dumbledore, "is the question I have been attempting to answer for some time." Wednesday looked up from her notebook. She looked at Gomez, who had been standing a step back, listening with the absolute stillness he used when the information was important enough to stop performing for. Their eyes met. Something passed between them that Harry couldn't read. Then Gomez said, very quietly, "How many?" Dumbledore looked at him. "I beg your pardon." "Horcruxes. You've been researching this for some time, which means you have a working theory. How many do you believe he made?" The chamber was very quiet. The shallow water on the floor reflected the torchlight. The great stone face of Salazar Slytherin gazed across them all from the far end with magnificent indifference. "My current best estimate," Dumbledore said, "is 6. Harry sat back on his heels on the wet stone floor of the chamber and looked at the cavity in the pillar and felt the specific shape of something he hadn't known was there settling into place, a dimension of what he was facing that the first 2 years of Hogwarts had only been the surface of. 6, he said. 6 objects, Dumbledore said. The diary was 1. Destroyed. Which leaves 5, said Harry. 5, said Dumbledore. Gomez had picked up his legal pad. He was writing very fast. "We're going to need to discuss all of this," he said. "In detail. Very soon. But first," he looked at Dumbledore, "this cache needs to be documented and secured. Officially. Not by the Ministry." He looked at the pillar. "If Fudge gets wind of what's in here, it becomes a political instrument before it becomes evidence." "Agreed," Dumbledore said. "I want copies of the tablet inscriptions," Wednesday said. "Wednesday," Morticia began. "Mother, these tablets predate the castle in parts. The linguistic construction suggests Slytherin was recording something he intended to be found by specific future readers. People who could read Parseltongue in written form." She looked at Harry. "Could you read them?" Harry looked at the tablets. They were carved with the same style of serpentine script that had covered the entrance pipe. He looked at the topmost one, and the same sensation occurred, meaning arriving before sound, the symbols arranging themselves into sense in a way that bypassed the normal steps of reading. "Yes," he said, with some surprise. "Yes, I can." "Then you're going to read them to me," Wednesday said. "And I'm going to write them down. That will take, I know how long it will take." She looked at him steadily. You went down here in June because someone needed saving. We're going down here now because everyone needs saving, it's just a longer timeline. She paused. It's more important. Harry held the torch over the first tablet and began to read. They were in the chamber for 3 hours. In the first hour, Harry read the tablets while Wednesday transcribed and Dumbledore listened with the focused attention of someone who has been trying to solve a puzzle for decades and is now hearing several new pieces read aloud. In the second hour, Gomez and Dumbledore had a conversation that Harry caught fragments of: names, dates, the specific geography of the wizarding world's dark history, that felt like two very different maps being compared and found to cover different territory of the same country. In the third hour, Wednesday finished the transcription, photographed the cavity's contents with a camera she had produced from her notebook bag with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who brings a camera everywhere because you never know, and catalogued everything with the systematic precision of a professional archaeologist who is also 13. Pugsley found what he described as a structurally interesting feature in the back wall of the chamber and was politely but firmly redirected. Morticia spent most of the 3 hours walking the perimeter of the chamber at a slow pace, and by the end she had identified 2 additional hidden cavities, both empty, cleared out, she thought, some decades ago, which suggested that whatever had been in them had been retrieved by someone who knew they were there. This information made Dumbledore's expression do the complicated thing again. Fester had, at some point in the second hour, befriended the Basilisk's corpse. He was sitting beside it with the contentment of someone spending time with something they find genuinely interesting, and he had made several observations about the structural integrity of the scales and the specific composition of the venom sacs that he was planning to write up formally. When they finally came up through the pipe, muddy and cold and carrying considerably more information than they'd gone down with, the corridors of Hogwarts were empty, it was past dinner, the students were in their common rooms, and the castle had settled into its evening self, quieter and somehow more personal. Dumbledore walked with Harry. Behind them, Wednesday was reviewing her notes with the attention of someone who will not be going to bed until she has processed everything, and Gomez was on his third legal pad now, writing. "You're all right?" Dumbledore said, to Harry. "Getting there," Harry said. "What you said down there, about the Horcruxes. You've known for a while." It wasn't an accusation. Harry was genuinely trying to understand the geography of what Dumbledore knew and when. "I've suspected for a while," Dumbledore said. "There is a difference between suspecting something and knowing it with enough certainty to say it to a 12-year-old boy." He paused. "Though I am aware that distinction has its limits." Wednesday would say the distinction is the thing that gets people killed, Harry said, and was slightly surprised to find himself saying it, but it was what Wednesday would say, and it was also, he thought, true. Dumbledore looked at him sideways. "Yes," he said. "She would. And she would be right. What happens now? With what we found? Documentation. Secure containment. Research." Dumbledore's voice was careful. "And a conversation with the Ministry that I have been anticipating for some time." "About Malfoy," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him with an expression that was direct in a way his expressions usually weren't. "About Malfoy," he confirmed. "Among other things." By the time they reached the Great Hall, Fudge was there. He had not, apparently, gone back to the Ministry after the hearing ended. He had traveled to Hogwarts, by what means wasn't clear, but he was there in the entrance hall when they came in from the direction of the second floor, his lime-green bowler in hand, Umbridge behind him with her clipboard, 2 Ministry officials behind her looking somewhere between authoritative and uncertain, and an expression on his face that Harry associated with someone who has found out something they didn't plan to find out and is now attempting to manage the consequences. He looked at Harry. He looked at the group. He looked at the muddy evidence of underground excursion visible on most of them. His jaw tightened. "Professor Dumbledore," he said. "The Ministry has a standing request for the preservation of the Chamber of Secrets as an active investigation site." "It does," Dumbledore said. "Which means, Which means, Gomez said, stepping forward with his legal pad under his arm and the specific energy of a man who has been underground for 3 hours and is delighted to now be having a completely different kind of confrontation, that the ministry has had 3 months to conduct that investigation and has not done so. Under the Hogwarts Educational Governance Act of 1893, the headmaster has authority over school premises in the absence of active ministry presence. Professor Dumbledore has been present. The ministry has not. He smiled. So we went. Fudge stared at him. Did you know, Gomez said, pleasantly, that there was a cache of objects hidden in the chamber? Placed there, we believe, in the 1940s by Tom Riddle. Objects that provide material evidence about the mechanisms of his return and the nature of the threat he represents. He held up the legal pad. We documented everything. I have a full evidentiary record here. I'll be filing it with the ICW tomorrow morning. The color went out of Fudge's face. The ICW, he said. They've been very helpful, Gomez said. We have a standing conversation. He looked at Fudge steadily. Cornelius. The ministry had 3 months to do what we did tonight. You didn't do it. The question everyone will be asking tomorrow, when I file that report, is why. Fudge was very still. In the firelight of the entrance hall, with Dumbledore beside Harry and the Addams family arranged in a rough arc behind Gomez, and Umbridge's clipboard suddenly looking less like a tool and more like something she was holding for comfort, in all of that, Fudge looked like what he was, a man who had been managing narratives for a long time and had just found himself in one he couldn't manage. You don't understand the complexity, he started. I understand, Gomez said, that a child nearly died. I understand that the mechanism of that attempt has been sitting in the school for 3 months while the ministry held a hearing about the child's behavior instead of investigating the cause. His voice was still pleasant. It was the specific pleasantness of a man who has decided that pleasantness is more devastating than anger and is correct about this. I understand that someone introduced the artifact responsible into Hogwarts, and that the question of who that someone was hasn't been officially raised by the ministry at all. Despite the fact that it should have been the first question anyone asked. Fudge looked at Umbridge. Umbridge was writing on her clipboard again, or pretending to. What is it you want? Fudge said, and the question had the particular texture of a man offering terms because he can see that the alternative is worse. Gomez looked at him. Then at Dumbledore. Then at Harry. Not tonight, he said. Tonight, I want to file my documentation and sleep somewhere with good bones in the walls. He looked around the entrance hall approvingly. This place qualifies. Tomorrow, I'll have a list. He walked past Fudge toward the staircase, and the rest of the family followed, and Harry followed them, and in the entrance hall Fudge stood with his bowler hat in his hands and watched them go. Morticia passed him last. She did not look at him. She simply passed him, close enough that he could have reached out and touched her arm, and whatever her particular quality was, whatever it was that made people aware of things they'd prefer not to be aware of, worked on Cornelius Fudge for approximately 3 seconds. 3 seconds was apparently enough. When Harry looked back from the staircase, Fudge's face had the expression of a man who has just remembered something he had been working very hard not to think about, and it was not a comfortable expression to wear. Wednesday, beside Harry on the stairs, did not look back at all. Tomorrow, she said, this gets interesting. This wasn't interesting. Harry said. This was preliminary, she said, and kept walking. Tomorrow, we talk about Malfoy. Chapter 4, The Fall of Fudge. The morning started with owls. 14 of them arrived at Hogwarts before breakfast, landing on the staff table and the windowsills of the Great Hall with the particular intensity of birds carrying correspondence that somebody has decided is urgent. 3 of them were for Dumbledore, which he read at the table with his porridge going cold beside him. 4 were for Gomez, who read each one standing up, annotating them with his pen before folding them into his jacket with the satisfaction of someone receiving confirmation of things they had already suspected. 2 were for Wednesday, which surprised everyone except Wednesday. One was addressed to the Addams family generally and contained what appeared to be a formal complaint from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement regarding the previous evening's unauthorized access to an active investigation site, which Gomez read, found legally insufficient, and used as a bookmark. The remaining 4 owls circled the great hall twice before landing collectively in front of Harry, which the students who had drifted down for early breakfast watched with the cautious attention of people observing something that might require ducking. Harry untied the letters. The first was from Ron, written in the rapid breathless shorthand of someone who had heard something and needed confirmation. Harry, what is happening? Ginny came back from the ministry yesterday and said there were muggles in the courtroom, and Dad said the hearing got cleared, and then Mum started crying, which she does for good things too, so we don't know. Are you all right? Right back immediately. The second was from Hermione, 6 paragraphs of carefully organized questions, each one numbered, a bibliography at the bottom indicating sources she had already consulted, and a closing sentence that said, I am very glad you're cleared and I have several thoughts about the procedural framework if that's useful, which Harry found so fundamentally Hermione that it steadied something in him. The third was from a name he didn't recognize, written on ministry stationery and signed by someone called Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, whose handwriting was direct and whose message was brief. Mr. Potter, I voted for dismissal. I would like to speak with your representative at his earliest convenience. A.B. The fourth had no signature. The parchment was expensive, the handwriting precise and elegant and cold. It said, you should have taken the censure when it was offered. The courtesy will not be extended again. Harry set it on the table. Gomez, who had glanced across from 2 seats down, picked it up, read it, and set it back down. Keep that, he said. Don't touch it with your bare hands again. I'll have someone check it for trace enchantments, but I doubt he's that obvious. He's not obvious. A pause. It's Malfoy. I know, Harry said. Gomez looked at him. Are you frightened? Harry considered the question honestly. A bit. But it's different from yesterday's frightened. How so? Harry thought about it. Yesterday I was frightened of the courtroom. Today I'm frightened of the actual thing. He stopped. That's better, isn't it? It means I'm looking at the right thing. Gomez smiled, and for just a moment it was a different kind of smile from his usual one, quieter, more genuine, the smile of someone who has heard something they didn't expect and found it meaningful. That's considerably better, he said. Amelia Bones arrived at Hogwarts at 9 in the morning, which meant she'd requested the meeting and moved on it before most of the ministry had finished their morning tea, which told Gomez something specific about her and confirmed what he'd already gathered from her file. She was a square-jawed woman in her late 50s with a monocle and the bearing of someone who has spent a long career making decisions that mattered and is comfortable with that weight. She sat in Dumbledore's office, Dumbledore present, Gomez present, Harry present at Gomez's insistence, and she put her own documents on the table before anyone else had a chance to set an agenda. I want to be direct, she said. Please, Gomez said. The hearing yesterday was improperly convened. The charges were thin and the panel composition was irregular. I voted for dismissal because the evidence didn't meet basic threshold, not as a courtesy. She looked at Gomez. Your procedural challenges were correct, all of them. I want that on record. It is on record, Gomez said. I made sure of that. Good. She opened her folder. I want to talk about the diary. Specifically about where it came from. The room was quiet. The diary was a dark artifact of significant power, she continued. It was introduced into Hogwarts through a first-year student. The student has been interviewed. Her account indicates that the diary was introduced into her belongings at Diagon Alley, in the chaos preceding the start of term. She looked at Harry. Do you know what happened at Diagon Alley this year? Specifically at Flourish and Blots. There was an incident, Harry said. With Malfoy. He and with the Weasleys. He thought back. He was near Ginny's cauldron. Bones looked at him steadily. You saw him near her belongings. Yes. They were arguing. His father and Mr. Weasley. Harry paused, and the shape of it settled into place the way things do when you have all the pieces but haven't arranged them yet. He put it in her cauldron. That is Ginny Weasley's account as well, Bones said. She was 11 and distracted and didn't notice at the time. But she remembers the interaction now. And I have a statement from Arthur Weasley about the altercation. She closed the folder. I have enough to open a formal investigation into Lucius Malfoy for the introduction of a Class A banned dark object into a school under the Dangerous Magical Objects Act of 1968 and the endangerment of a minor. The silence had a different quality now. Dumbledore said, carefully, Amelia. You are aware of the complications. I'm aware that Lucius Malfoy has 12 Wizengamot members in his pocket and has been cultivating a relationship with the minister's office for 8 years, Bones said, without any particular heat. I am also aware that a 12-year-old girl was possessed for most of an academic year and nearly died in a chamber in the basement of this school, and that the object responsible was placed there by an adult who knew precisely what it was. She looked at Dumbledore. I am a patient woman, Albus. I have been patient for a long time. But this evidence is clear and the law is clear, and if the ministry cannot act on clear evidence and clear law, then the ministry is not doing the job it exists to do. Gomez had been writing for most of this. I have documentation from the chamber, he said. Photographs. Transcriptions. The cache we found establishes that Riddle was using the chamber for specific dark workings in the 1940s, and the diary was consistent with those workings in ways that suggest Malfoy knew more about what he was introducing into the school than a simple dark artifact collector would know. He looked at Bones. That changes the charge. It's not just dangerous object introduction. It's knowing facilitation of a dark working against a minor. Bones looked at him. Something in her expression sharpened. That's an intent charge. It's harder to prove. I know. But it's the right charge. He capped his pen. And I have the evidence to support the investigation that would prove it, if the investigation is conducted properly. Bones was quiet for a moment. You would be willing to provide that documentation formally? As part of a DMLE filing? With appropriate protections for Harry's safety and privacy, yes. Albus, she said. You have my full cooperation, Dumbledore said. Bones nodded once. She picked up her folder, stood, and looked at Harry. Mr. Potter. I apologize that this ministry has not handled your situation with the care it deserved. I intend to do better. It was not a flowery statement. She delivered it the way she delivered everything, directly and without performance. We will be in touch. She left, and Harry had the specific feeling of having just met someone whose name he should remember. Fudge arrived at Hogwarts at 11. He arrived without announcement, which Dumbledore's portrait network caught 3 minutes before he appeared. A whisper passed between the painting of Armando Dippet in the corridor and the painting of Everard in the headmaster's office, and Dumbledore had set down his tea with a specific kind of measured calm by the time the knock came at his door. Fudge had Umbridge, 2 ministry officials, and an expression that had decided, overnight, to be authoritative. He sat down in Dumbledore's office like a man reclaiming territory, placed his bowler on the side table, and looked across the desk with the air of someone who has prepared remarks. Albus, he said. I need to discuss last night's incursion into the chamber. Documented, legally sound, and already filed with the ICW, Dumbledore said. Were there other items? Fudge's prepared remarks were apparently not organized for this opening. He shifted. The items recovered from the chamber are ministry property. The chamber is on ministry governed, the chamber is under Hogwarts, which is governed by the school's board of trustees in educational matters and the headmaster in day-to-day matters, Gomez said. He was sitting in the corner of the office on a chair that had not been there before and that Harry suspected he had simply arranged to be there because the alternative was standing during a meeting, which Gomez appeared to regard as a waste of potential. The ministry's property claim would require a formal filing under the Wizarding Property Seizure Act, which requires the property to be unclaimed. The items in the chamber were identified last night as placed by Tom Riddle and relevant to an ongoing investigation into his activities. They are evidence, not property, which means the DMLE has jurisdiction, specifically, the head of the DMLE. He paused. Who, I understand, you'll be hearing from shortly. Fudge looked at Gomez with the expression of a man who has been cornered in his own building. The DMLE reports to the minister. The DMLE is bound by law, Gomez said. As is the minister, technically speaking. I am aware of my legal obligations. Then you're aware that the introduction of a Class A banned dark object into Hogwarts by an adult with knowledge of its nature constitutes a criminal offense under at least 3 separate statutes, and that the Ministry's failure to investigate it for 3 months while instead convening a disciplinary hearing against the 12-year-old victim is a pattern that would look very interesting to the ICW's Oversight Committee. He smiled. Which is why I've been corresponding with them. The room had the particular weight of a conversation that has crossed from argument into something more serious. Fudge looked at Umbridge. Umbridge, for the first time since Harry had met her, did not appear to have anything to write on her clipboard. Cornelius, Dumbledore said, and his voice was not unkind. It was the voice of someone who has known a person for a long time and is choosing not to be unkind even when unkindness would be easy. This has gone as far as it should go. What Gomez is describing, what Amelia is filing, is going to proceed. The question before you is not whether the investigation happens. It is whether you are seen to be part of the solution or part of the problem when it does. Fudge stared at him. The investigation will find what it finds, Dumbledore continued. But a minister who proactively cooperates with a DMLE investigation, who is acting in good faith on incomplete information, who takes corrective action when the full picture is revealed, that minister has a defensible position. A minister who obstructs, he did not finish the sentence. He didn't need to. You're asking me to sanction an investigation into Lucius Malfoy, Fudge said. I'm asking you to allow the law to function, Dumbledore said. A very long silence. Harry was watching Fudge's face. He could see the calculation happening. Not the simple calculation of someone deciding between right and wrong, but the far more complex one of someone deciding between which risk was larger. Lucius Malfoy's displeasure on one side. The ICW, Amelia Bones, and Gomez Addams on the other. Staying in power on one side. What staying in power would cost him on the other. I'll need time to, Fudge started. You don't have time, Gomez said. Not unkindly. Just accurately. The ICW correspondence is filed. Amelia's investigation opens this afternoon regardless of your position on it because she doesn't need your permission, she needs you to not obstruct it. The question is what you do in the next 24 hours, because that's the window before this becomes a public record. He looked at Fudge steadily. I'd like to help you, Cornelius. Genuinely. I have no interest in your destruction. You're not the target here. Fudge looked at him with the expression of a man receiving help he didn't ask for from someone he has no framework for. Why would you? Because Harry Potter needs functional institutions, Gomez said simply. Not a destroyed ministry, not a leadership vacuum, functional institutions that do their jobs. Your resignation doesn't help that unless there's someone better ready to step into the space. He paused. Is there? Fudge looked at Dumbledore. Madame Bones has the confidence of the DMLE, Dumbledore said, carefully neutral. She'd never, Fudge started. Not the ministry, Gomez said. Not now. But the question of what comes next matters, and it matters that you think about it before events think about it for you. He leaned forward. Cornelius. Lucius Malfoy put a weapon into the hands of an 11-year-old girl and sent her into school with it. He did it knowingly. Whatever he has told you, whatever support he has offered, whatever access to power you have built through that relationship, he used a child as a delivery mechanism for a device intended to open a school to a monster. He let that sit in the air. Is that the relationship you want to be seen defending? The calculation on Fudge's face had changed quality. The political accounting was still happening, but something had gotten into it that hadn't been there before, something older and more uncomfortable than politics. I wasn't aware of what the diary was, he said. I know, Gomez said. I wasn't aware of I didn't know what he did. I know, Gomez said again. That's exactly the point. Fudge left at 11:30. He did not resign. Not yet. He walked out of Dumbledore's office with Umbridge and the two officials, put his bowler back on, and went down the corridor with the gait of a man who has had something very heavy placed on his back and is still deciding whether to set it down or keep walking. Gomez watched him go from the doorway. Then he went back inside and sat down. He'll resign, he said. Today? Harry asked. Today or tomorrow? Tonight at the latest. Gomez looked at his notes. He's running the numbers and the numbers don't work anymore. The question is whether he resigns on his own terms or whether Amelia's investigation filing becomes public first, at which point the terms are no longer his. He paused. I gave him an exit. Most people take a graceful exit when it's offered, even if they're angry about being offered it. What if Malfoy gets to him first? Harry said. Then Malfoy confirms for him exactly what I've been suggesting, that the relationship is about control, not support. Gomez smiled slightly. Either way it works. Dumbledore was looking at Harry. You're thinking clearly, he said. I'm learning, Harry said. And then, because the thought had been there since the chamber and he was tired of not saying it, why didn't you tell me? About Riddle. About what you suspected. Dumbledore looked at him, and for a moment his expression was entirely unguarded, something Harry had seen exactly once before, briefly, and which was more honest than his usual register in a way that was almost uncomfortable. Because, he said, I have a habit of carrying information I believe is too heavy for others, and delivering it only when I believe they are ready for the weight. A pause. And I have begun to suspect that I am not always the best judge of readiness. Harry held his gaze. I was in the chamber, he said. I killed the thing in the chamber. I can handle information about why it was there. Yes, Dumbledore said. You can. He paused. I'm sorry, Harry. Harry looked at the desk. At his hands. Then back up. Okay, he said. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, or not only forgiveness. It was also the beginning of something different, a relationship with different terms, more honest ones, which was in some ways more valuable. Gomez, who had been very carefully reading his notes during this exchange and not looking at either of them, turned a page and found something that required his attention on the other side. Harry suspected there was nothing on the other side. Wednesday found Harry at lunch. She arrived at the Gryffindor table without invitation and sat across from him with her notebook, which had acquired additional pages since the chamber and was starting to look structural. Ron, who had come back from Hogsmeade with Fred and George specifically because something was clearly happening and he needed to be near it, sat 2 seats down and made a heroic effort not to stare. Hermione sat beside Harry and looked at Wednesday with the expression she reserved for sources of significant information. They looked at each other for a moment, Hermione and Wednesday, 2 people who have heard of each other through Harry and are now performing a rapid assessment. You transcribed the tablets, Hermione said. All 12, Wednesday confirmed. Can I see? Wednesday looked at her. What do you know about Parseltongue as a written language? It has a runic base but the syntactic structure is agglutinative, which distinguishes it from most European magical writing systems. There have been 3 serious academic studies and all of them have methodological flaws because none of the authors were actual Parselmouths. A pause. Harry could verify the transcriptions against the original inscriptions directly. Wednesday looked at Harry. I can try, Harry said. I'd have to go back to the chamber. We're going back tomorrow, Wednesday said. Ron looked up from his sandwich. You're going back into the Chamber of Secrets. The first time was somewhat rushed, Wednesday said. The first time there was a giant snake in it. The snake is dead. The giant dead snake is still in it. Fester is making notes about the snake, Wednesday said, with the particular tone she used when reporting family facts that she found reasonable and expected others to find alarming. He'll have a report by Friday. Ron looked at Harry. Harry looked back at Ron with the expression of someone who has had 4 days to adjust to this and is still working on parts of it. Your family is, Ron started. Yes, Harry said. Are they staying? Harry looked at Wednesday. Wednesday was writing something. Are you staying? He asked her. She looked up. Until this is resolved, she said. The Malfoy situation. The investigation. The larger context. She glanced at her notebook. There is a great deal left to do. She means the Horcruxes, Hermione said, quietly. Everyone at the table went very still. Wednesday looked at Hermione with something that might have been respect. Professor Dumbledore told you? He told Harry, Hermione said. Harry told us. Or, Harry told me, I told Ron. She paused. We're his people. We needed to know. Wednesday looked at the three of them together for a moment, Ron and Harry and Hermione, the specific arrangement of them that had survived 2 years of things that should have broken it. Something shifted in her expression. Not warmth, exactly. More like recognition of something she respected. 6, she said. 1 down. 5 remaining. And we have 12 tablets of Slytherin's personal notes that nobody has read in 1,000 years. She looked at Harry. I think you should learn to read Parseltongue deliberately. Not just the passive understanding. Actively. Can I do that? I don't know, she said. Can you choose not to understand it when you hear it? Harry thought about this. He'd never tried. No, he said. It just happens. Then the understanding is automatic. The question is whether it's accessible in a direction you can control. She wrote something. We'll test it in the chamber tomorrow. If you can learn to read it consciously, the tablets become a research resource rather than something I'm just transcribing phonetically. She paused. It would be significantly faster. Wednesday, Harry said. Yes. Why do you care about this? The Horcruxes. Malfoy. It's not your problem. She looked at him with those steady dark eyes, and for a moment she was just 13 and sitting in a castle that wasn't hers thinking about a problem that didn't belong to her age group, and Harry thought she was going to say something clinical and efficient. My family, she said, has a long relationship with darkness. Not because we worship it. Because we understand it. And darkness that is being weaponized against children by adult men with political ambitions is, she paused, and in the pause something moved across her face that was the most human thing Harry had seen from her. The kind that deserves to be dismantled. She went back to her notebook. Ron, very quietly, said to Harry, I like her. Harry looked at Wednesday. Yeah, he said. Me too. Fudge resigned at 3 in the afternoon. Not quietly. Not through a statement released to the press. Live. In the atrium of the Ministry of Magic, in front of approximately 40 ministry employees, 3 reporters, and the fountain with the golden statues, whose cheerful splashing provided an absurd backdrop. Harry wasn't there for it, but Gomez was, because Gomez had gone back to the ministry for the ICW filing and had arrived in the atrium at 2:45 to find Fudge standing near the fountain with his bowler in both hands and the expression of a man who has been talking to himself for several hours and has reached a conclusion. What happened next was described to Harry afterward in several different versions, but the consistent elements were these: Fudge had looked at Gomez across the atrium. Gomez had crossed the atrium to him. Something had been said, briefly, in private, that nobody else heard. And then Fudge had turned to the gathered ministry employees, who had been going about their afternoon and were now, finding themselves suddenly audiences to something, stopping to watch, and he had said, in the clear carrying voice of someone who has decided that if this must happen it will happen with some remaining dignity, that he was resigning as Minister for Magic with immediate effect, that the Deputy Minister would assume duties pending a formal election, and that he wished the Ministry and the wizarding world well in the difficult times ahead. He had put his bowler on. He had walked out. The atrium had been silent for approximately 15 seconds, and then everyone had started talking at once, and by 4 o'clock the news had reached Hogwarts through a cascade of owls and students with wizarding wireless sets and Percy Weasley, who appeared at dinner with the expression of someone who has had the rug pulled out from under a career aspiration and is processing it with imperfect success. Harry heard about it sitting in the courtyard with Wednesday and Hermione, from a third-year Hufflepuff who came running past with a copy of the early evening Prophet so fresh the ink was still slightly warm. Fudge resigns, the headline read. Minister cites personal reasons, sources suggest ministry crisis. Below the fold, ICW opens oversight inquiry into Wizengamot procedure. International body cites irregularities in recent juvenile hearing. Harry read it twice. Then he handed it to Hermione. Hermione read it and looked up. What did your father say to him? She asked Wednesday. I don't know exactly, Wednesday said. But I can guess. What's your guess? Wednesday was quiet for a moment. That the question was never whether to resign. The question was whether to resign as the man who held on too long and was pushed, or as the man who still had enough honesty left to know when something had gone too far. She paused. My father has a way of making the question that simple. Harry looked at the headline again. Then at the courtyard. Then, through the archway that looked toward the Forbidden Forest, at the horizon where the late afternoon light was going orange and long. Is this good? He asked. For everything that comes next. Fudge wasn't the main problem, Wednesday said. He was the obstacle. The main problem is still standing. Malfoy. Malfoy. She looked at Harry. He will have heard about the resignation by now. He will be calculating. He has at least 4 contingency positions prepared because that's the kind of man he is. She closed her notebook. He will move tonight or tomorrow. He will try to get ahead of the investigation by controlling something, the Wizengamot, the Prophet, the school board. Whatever he thinks he can still close. And we don't let him close it. She stood up. Your father comes tomorrow morning, she said to Harry. Harry stared at her. What? I wrote to him. After the hearing. He should know what's happening. He's Arthur Weasley. He works for the ministry, he knows the landscape, and Ginny is his daughter and she nearly died. She looked at Harry with the directness she applied to everything. You need people who understand what Malfoy has access to. Arthur Weasley has spent years watching him work from the inside of the institution. You wrote to Mr. Weasley without, was I wrong? Harry stopped. Thought about it. No, he said. Then we'll be ready tomorrow. She looked at the Prophet in Hermione's hands. At the headline. At the word resigns in large black letters. Tonight, she said, we prepare. Hermione looked at Wednesday with an expression that Harry recognized from the library, the expression of encountering something extremely useful. I have notes on the Wizengamot board composition going back 12 years, she said. I started compiling them after the hearing. Wednesday looked at her. Show me. They went inside. Harry sat in the courtyard alone for a moment with the evening air and the last of the orange light and the weight of everything that was in motion. Then he heard the sound of Gomez's voice from somewhere inside, returning, evidently, with energy undimmed by whatever had happened in the ministry atrium, and the sound of Pugsley's answering response, and something that was probably Fester saying something that made the portraits near the entrance hall express varying degrees of consternation. His family. He had family here. He hadn't had that before, not really, not this kind, people who came in the direction of the trouble rather than away from it, people who read the charter and filed the paperwork and went underground and stood in atrium fountains having conversations that ended with ministers resigning, Who treated him not like a symbol or a liability or a headline but like a 12-year-old boy who had been alone for too long and needed someone to have his back. The feeling in his chest that he'd felt in the corridor yesterday, that thing he didn't have words for yet, was still there, but it had grown into something he could almost name. He went inside. There was work to do. That evening, in the library, they built the case. Hermione's notes were extraordinary. She had been compiling them, she admitted, since the summer after first year, because the institutional framework seemed unstable and it seemed prudent to understand it, which Ron received with the expression of someone who has known Hermione for 2 years and still occasionally discovers new dimensions of her thoroughness. Arthur Weasley's letter arrived with the night owls, a long, careful, slightly stunned piece of correspondence that said yes, he was coming, and included 2 pages of notes about Malfoy's Wizengamot relationships and their specific voting patterns on dark object legislation that was so detailed it suggested Arthur had been waiting for someone to ask for exactly this. Gomez spread everything across the library table and organized it with the systematic pleasure of a man arranging pieces of an argument he has been constructing for several days. He had his legal pads. He had the ICW correspondence. He had the chamber documentation. He had Amelia Bones's filed investigation. He had the letters, the pattern of Wizengamot votes, the record of Malfoy's position as school governor, the specific sequence of events at Diagon Alley. Wednesday had the tablet transcriptions and was working through them with Hermione, who was treating the linguistic analysis with an intensity that had already produced 4 pages of notes and a short list of questions for Harry. Here, Gomez said, at some point after 9 o'clock, and tapped the table with his pen to get everyone's attention. He had drawn a diagram on one of the legal pads, not a flowchart, but something more like a web, with names and dates and relationships. At the center, LM lines going outward to, Borgin and Burke's, acquisition of the diary, Hogwarts Board, lever for removing Dumbledore, ministry contacts, protection from investigation, Death Eater network, connection to V and the ideology that made the diary possible. At the outside of the web, in a different color, evidence. What we have, Gomez said, is enough for Amelia to charge him with the dark object introduction. What we need, for the larger picture, is the connection between Malfoy's specific knowledge of the diary's nature and his relationship with Riddle's ideology. That's what takes this from opportunistic crime to deliberate dark conspiracy, and that's what makes it stick against a man with 12 Wizengamot members in his circle. The diary was a Horcrux, Harry said. If we can prove he knew what it was, then he didn't just introduce a dangerous object, Gomez said. He knowingly facilitated an attempt to resurrect a dark wizard through the possession and near death of an 11-year-old girl. He looked at the web. That's not a minister-level charge. That's an ICW-level charge. Can you prove he knew? Ron said. Probably not directly, Gomez admitted. What I can prove is that a man with his connections, his knowledge of dark artifacts, his documented relationship with Death Eater ideology, bought a specific item from Borgin and Burke's, kept it for some years, and then placed it specifically in a Muggle-born child's belongings on the first day of school. He tapped the diagram. The proof of knowledge is circumstantial. The pattern of behavior is not. Circumstantial can be enough? Harry asked. Circumstantial with enough accumulation becomes overwhelming, Gomez said. It's not what happened, it's what everything together says about what happened. He picked up his pen. Tomorrow, Arthur Weasley comes. Then we sit down with Amelia Bones and we give her the complete picture, not just what she has, but all of it. The chamber, the tablets, the Horcrux records, the pattern. He looked at Harry. She is the right person to have this information. She will use it correctly. And Malfoy? Harry said. Gomez was quiet for a moment. Malfoy will move tomorrow. He's already moving. He looked at the diagram. The question is which lever he pulls. I think, he tapped the board member connections. I think he moves against Dumbledore. It's his most natural play, the one he tried this year and almost made work. If Dumbledore is destabilized, the school is unstable, the evidence chain for anything connected to Hogwarts becomes complicated. He paused. But he doesn't know what we have from the chamber. He doesn't know about the tablet transcriptions. He's moving without full information. And we have it, Harry said. And we have it. Gomez looked at him. Go to sleep, Harry. Tomorrow is going to be long. I can't sleep, Harry said honestly. Then sit here and think, but think quietly, because the rest of us will be sleeping and we need to be sharp. He stood, stretched, and looked at the web on the legal pad with the expression of a man surveying work he is genuinely pleased with. He's going to make a mistake tomorrow, he said. He's already committed to the move and he thinks he has the advantage. Men who think they have the advantage get sloppy. How do you know he'll make a mistake? Gomez picked up his jacket from the chair back, slung it over his arm, and smiled. Because I've arranged for him to make one, he said, and went to bed. Harry sat in the library with the diagram and the notes and the accumulated weight of everything in motion, and after a while Hermione came back from wherever she'd gone and sat across from him without saying anything, and they sat together in the library with the night sounds of Hogwarts around them and the work spread out before them. After a while she said, "Are you scared?" "Yes," Harry said. "But I'm not alone." Hermione looked at him. Then at the diagram. Then she smiled the way she smiled when she had everything organized and the path forward was clear. "No," she said. "You're definitely not alone." Chapter 5, The Malfoy Problem. Arthur Weasley arrived at 7 in the morning looking like a man who had not slept and had used the time productively. He came through the flue in Dumbledore's office with a traveling case under one arm and a folder under the other, and the expression on his face was something Harry had never quite seen on him before, not the cheerful curiosity Arthur usually wore, not the gentle anxiety of a man with 6 children and a complicated relationship with his household budget. This was the face of a father who had spent a night thinking about what had almost happened to his daughter, and had arrived somewhere quiet and certain on the other side of it. He saw Harry first and crossed the room and hugged him, which surprised Harry enough that he stood with his arms slightly away from his body for half a second before returning it. Arthur gripped the back of his head briefly in the way of someone checking that a person is actually present and intact, then stepped back and looked at him. "All right," he said. "Yeah," Harry said. Arthur nodded once, the way you nod when the answer is good but insufficient for the size of the relief. Then he looked at Gomez, who was standing at Dumbledore's desk with his jacket already on and his legal pads already open, and he put his hand out. "Gomez Addams," he said. "Arthur Weasley." Gomez shook his hand with both of his. "You brought notes," he said, with genuine warmth, looking at the folder. "I brought everything I have," Arthur said. "Which is more than I thought when I started organizing it last night." He sat down, opened the folder on the desk, and looked at the diagram that Gomez had transferred from the legal pad to a larger sheet of paper overnight. His eyes moved through it quickly, following the lines outward from the center. "This is him." "All of it." "Most of it," Gomez said. "You fill in what's missing." They bent over the paper together. Harry watched the two of them work, the way Arthur's ministry knowledge fitted into the gaps in Gomez's legal architecture like pieces of different puzzles that happened to be from the same picture. Arthur knew things that no file would have captured, the informal relationships, who owed what to whom, which Wizengamot votes had happened because of genuine belief and which had happened because a word had been said in the right corridor at the right time. He knew which ministry departments had been quietly defunded in ways that benefited Malfoy interests. He knew which appointments had been made based on recommendations that traced back, through 1 or 2 removes, to the Malfoy estate. "He's been building this for years," Arthur said, at one point, and his voice had the specific quality of someone confirming a thing they've suspected for a long time but never had occasion to say plainly. "Not quickly. Not dramatically. Brick by brick. People assume dark wizards operate through force. Lucius has always preferred architecture. He's very good at it," Gomez said. "He is," Arthur agreed. "That's what makes him dangerous." A pause. That's what makes him more dangerous than what he used to be. When you know who was powerful, Lucius had a patron. Now he has a position. The position is his own. Nobody gave it to him. Until Tuesday, Gomez said. Arthur looked at the diagram. Until Tuesday. Wednesday came in at 8 with Hermione, both of them carrying notebooks and wearing the slightly stretched look of people who had worked late and started early and considered this reasonable. Ron came in behind them with 4 cups of tea, distributed them with the quiet practicality of someone raised in a large family who understands that caffeine is infrastructure, and took up a position near the door where he could see both the room and the corridor. Hermione's worked out the board composition problem, Wednesday said, without preamble. The Hogwarts board? Arthur looked up. Hermione set her notes on the desk. Malfoy has been school governor for 6 years. He coordinated the removal of Dumbledore this year through a board vote that Wednesday has established was procedurally invalid. One governor was absent without notification, another was under a proxy arrangement that doesn't appear in the official charter. If those votes are invalid, the suspension never legally occurred and the board action was improper. She looked at Gomez. Which means Dumbledore's reinstatement this summer was corrective but the underlying mechanism was illegal, and that illegal mechanism was orchestrated by Malfoy. That's not a criminal charge by itself, Gomez said. No, Hermione agreed. But it establishes a pattern of Malfoy manipulating institutional processes connected to Hogwarts. Combined with the diary introduction, combined with the chamber documentation, it's the architecture, Gomez said, and looked at Arthur, who was nodding slowly. Brick by brick, Arthur said. Wednesday had moved to the large diagram and was adding something to it in her precise, unhurried hand, a new line from Malfoy's name to a notation that read board/procedural manipulation with dates underneath. There's one more thing, she said. She didn't turn around when she said it. The tablets. The room paid attention. Harry and I went through the transcriptions last night after everyone else was asleep. She turned now. 3 of the 12 tablets are Slytherin's records. Standard historical material, the chamber's construction, the Basilisk's provenance, the Parselmouth inheritance theory he was developing. Significant but not immediately relevant. She looked at Harry. 3 of the tablets are not Slytherin's. Harry said, they're riddles. Yes. Written in the same script but a different hand, added to the collection at some point in the 1940s. 2 of them are personal notation, experimental records, dark working parameters. The kind of thing you write when you're developing a technique and need to track variables. She paused. The 3rd one is a list. A list of what? Dumbledore said. He had been at his desk through all of this, largely silent, listening with the quality of attention he used when information was moving faster than he could organize it, which was rare enough to be noticeable. Objects, Wednesday said. 7 of them. Each described in a brief phrase, a physical description and a location. She opened her notebook. The first description matches the diary. The location listed is the keeping of LM. She looked up. There's no initial elsewhere on the tablet. Just there. The keeping of LM. The room was very quiet. Arthur sat back in his chair. He was trusted with it, he said. He was listed as the keeper, Wednesday said. Whether that was trust, assignment, or something else, the record doesn't say. But Riddle wrote Malfoy's initials next to the diary object's description in a private record kept in a hidden chamber in the 1940s. She closed the notebook. This predates Lucius Malfoy's birth. The LM in that record is almost certainly his father, Abraxas Malfoy. The connection is inherited, Gomez said. The connection is generational, Wednesday said. Lucius didn't acquire the diary from Borgin and Burkes. He inherited it. As a trust. From a family relationship with Riddle that goes back at least 20 years before the first fall. She paused. He didn't just know what the diary was. His family was custodians of it. Harry looked at the diagram. At the line from LM to the diary notation. At the chamber photographs spread out on the corner of the desk. At the tablet transcription in Wednesday's notebook. That's the connection, he said. That's the intent, Gomez said. That's what proves he knew. He picked up his pen. He was writing very fast. The tablet is physical evidence, it's in the chamber, we photographed it, we have the transcription, and Harry can verify it as a Parselmouth reader. It's a primary source document establishing a generational custodianship of a known dark artifact with Riddle's own notation. He looked at Dumbledore. This, combined with everything else, is not a ministry-level case. This is a full ICW case. He can be charged internationally. Dumbledore said, carefully, he will have lawyers. He'll need them, Gomez said. Malfoy arrived at Hogwarts at 9:30. He had not been invited. He walked through the main gates with 2 associates and the air of someone who owns every room he enters by prior arrangement, and the first sign that something was happening was the sound of his cane on the entrance hall floor, which had the deliberate metronomic quality of someone announcing their presence. He asked a passing second year where Dumbledore's office was, which told Harry, who heard about it from Neville, who witnessed it from the first-floor landing, that he either didn't know or was performing the courtesy of asking rather than simply going. Either way, he was moving toward the headmaster's office. Gomez looked up from the desk when the sound reached them through Dumbledore's open door. He looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked at the door. Neither of them appeared surprised. You arranged this, Harry said. Gomez continued writing. I suggested, in my filing to the ICW last night, that the evidence obtained from the chamber raised questions about specific individuals that the ministry would be obligated to explore. I sent a courtesy copy to Lucius Malfoy's solicitor at midnight. He looked up briefly. A man of his instincts, receiving a legal courtesy copy of an ICW filing at midnight, will move immediately. He doesn't wait. Waiting seeds initiative. You made him come here, Harry said. I made it logical for him to come here, Gomez said. There's a difference. His decision is his own. He paused. Although I did make sure Amelia Bones knew he'd be arriving. Is she, in the entrance hall, Dumbledore said. He was looking at a small silvery something, a Patronus, Harry realized, a cat, which had just phased through the wall and delivered a message that had been waiting for some time. With 2 oars. The sequence of it landed in Harry's understanding all at once, the way Gomez's plan seemed to work, not dramatic, not a trap exactly, but an arrangement of consequences that had been flowing toward this moment since Tuesday morning, since the letter, since the hearing, since the chamber. Each piece had moved to its natural position. Arthur looked at the door. Then at Gomez. You're very good at this, he said. I enjoy it, Gomez said, which was both honest and slightly alarming as an explanation. Should Harry be here? Ron said, from the door. Everyone looked at Harry. Harry looked back at all of them. Yes, he said. Nobody argued. Lucius Malfoy entered Dumbledore's office like a man who has rehearsed his entrance and finds it satisfying. He saw Dumbledore. He saw Arthur Weasley, which produced a fractional reaction, surprise managed so quickly it was almost invisible, but not quite. He saw the desk covered in documents. He saw the diagram. He saw Gomez Addams standing beside the diagram with a pen, and something happened behind his eyes that was not visible anywhere else on his face. Professor Dumbledore, he said. His voice was exactly what it always was, measured, cultivated, with the specific modulation of a man who has spent years learning to say things with perfect control. I came to discuss the ICW filing. I understand there are claims being made that, Mr. Malfoy, Gomez said. Lucius looked at him. In the daylight of the office, with the full cast assembled around the desk and the diagram visible and the photographs from the chamber in the corner, he looked exactly like himself, elegant, composed, formidable. Harry watched his eyes move through the room the way a chess player's eyes move through a board, assessing, calculating, finding the lines. The eyes moved across the diagram. Stopped briefly at the notation board / procedural manipulation. Moved to the photographs. Stopped at the chamber photographs. Stopped at the tablet close-up. Moved to Harry. Harry held his gaze. He did not look away. He was sitting in the chair beside the desk, and he was aware of Gomez to his left and Dumbledore behind the desk and Wednesday standing in the window embrasure with her notebook, and he held Lucius Malfoy's gaze and felt nothing like what he'd felt in this man's presence before. Not exactly unafraid. More like standing on ground that had weight to it. "You've been busy," Lucius said. "Still controlled. Still cultivated. Mr. Addams. Your reputation precedes you." "As does yours," Gomez said pleasantly. "I came to discuss the filing. To clarify any misunderstandings before, there are no misunderstandings," Gomez said. "The filing is accurate. The evidence is documented. The ICW has a copy and the DMLE has a copy, and both of them have been in receipt of that copy long enough to have read it." He gestured at the chair on the other side of the desk. "Sit down, Mr. Malfoy." Something moved through Lucius's expression. Not compliance, not yet. A reassessment. He sat down with the ease of a man choosing to sit rather than being made to, the distinction visible in the deliberateness of the motion. "The tablet you found in the chamber," he said. "What about it?" "It is a 1,000-year-old document in a dead magical language. Whatever your transcription says, the interpretive, the transcription was performed by a native Parseltongue speaker," Gomez said. "Cross-referenced with a secondary linguistic analysis by Miss Granger here and confirmed against the original inscription by the same speaker this morning." He paused. "Would you like to examine the methodology, or shall we proceed?" Lucius looked at Harry. "You went back this morning." "Yes," Harry said. "You verified the inscription." "Yes." "And what did it say?" "Your family's initials," Harry said. "Next to a description of the diary. In Riddle's own handwriting." He paused. "In a private record he kept in a hidden chamber inside a sealed basilisk den underneath the school." He held Lucius's gaze. "He trusted you with it. Your family." He wrote it down. Something moved behind Lucius Malfoy's eyes then, something that was more complex than Harry had expected. Not fear, not quite. Something that was the distant ancestor of fear, the awareness of consequences that have arrived earlier than anticipated and are now standing in the room. "That notation proves nothing about my knowledge of the objects. Combined with the other evidence, it proves custodianship going back at least one generation," Gomez said. "Which is what we said in the filing. We're not claiming you invented the diary. We're establishing that it came to you through a family trust relationship with its creator, that you were therefore aware of its nature, and that you introduced it deliberately into Hogwarts with the knowledge of what it would do." He let that sit. "That's the case. It's solid." Lucius was very still. "I have 12 votes on the Wizengamot," he said. "You had 12 votes on the Wizengamot," Gomez said. "This is an ICW matter. The Wizengamot is below the ICW's jurisdiction in cases involving international treaty obligations, which the dark object provisions fall under." He paused. "Your 12 votes are a domestic instrument. This is not a domestic case anymore." The room was quiet. From outside, through the stone walls, came the very faint sound of footsteps, measured, official, somewhere on the staircase. Lucius heard it. His eyes moved to the door. Back to Gomez. Back to Dumbledore. He looked at the photographs on the desk. At the diagram. At Wednesday in the window, who was watching him with the focused attention she applied to everything and which had, by this point, a physical quality to it. He looked at Arthur Weasley last. And Arthur Weasley, who was generally the gentlest man Harry knew, was looking back at him with an expression so stripped of its usual warmth that he looked like someone Harry hadn't met before. "That was my daughter," Arthur said. His voice was very quiet and very even. She was 11 years old. She carried that thing all year. She nearly died in that chamber. He did not raise his voice. He did not add anything. He let it stand there. Lucius said nothing. The footsteps reached the door. Amelia Bones entered, flanked by 2 Aurors, and she crossed to the desk with the efficient directness of someone who has been briefed and is here to execute rather than deliberate. She looked at Lucius Malfoy with the professional neutrality of law that has been properly applied. "Mr. Malfoy," she said. "Under the Dangerous Magical Objects Act of 1968 and the ICW treaty provisions regarding dark artifacts of Class A designation, I am serving you with a formal notice of investigation. You are required to surrender your Wizengamot credentials pending the outcome of that investigation, to provide access to your property and records as specified in the attached schedule, and to present yourself to DMLE headquarters at 9 o'clock Monday morning." She held out the document. Lucius looked at it. He looked at the room. Harry watched his face and saw the thing he'd seen briefly in the Chamber of Secrets in June, the recalculation, the reassessment, but this time it ran longer and settled differently. In the chamber it had been Riddle's confidence, arrogance so deep it was structural. This was different. This was a man running out of moves and knowing it. He took the document. He looked at it. He folded it once, precisely, and put it inside his robe. "I will be represented by counsel," he said. "Of course," Amelia said. He stood. He straightened his cane. He looked, once more, around the room, at Dumbledore, at Arthur, at Gomez, at Harry, and his face was composed, because Lucius Malfoy's face was always composed. It was one of the things about him that had always been true. But under it, visible now in the way that structural damage is visible when you know what you're looking at, was the shape of something that had cracked. He left. The door closed behind him. The room let out a collective breath that nobody had entirely been aware of holding. Fester appeared in the doorway approximately 30 seconds later. Everyone looked at him. "Interesting man," he said. "He passed me in the corridor. He smells like old money and something else I couldn't quite identify." He looked thoughtful. "I want to say, Snake." Gomez looked at him. "Fester." I know. Fester waved a hand. "I just wanted to mention it." He looked around the office with satisfaction. "How'd it go?" "Well," Gomez said. "Did he cry?" "No." "Pity." Fester brightened. "What's next?" What was next, it turned out, was complicated. The investigation opened. Amelia Bones moved with the efficiency of someone who had been waiting for the opportunity and had prepared extensively for it, and by Monday the DMLE had begun formal proceedings that the Prophet reported with the kind of cautious astonishment reserved for things that everyone has been aware of for years but nobody has been willing to say. The headline on Monday read, "Malfoy under investigation, ICW involvement in dark artifact case." Below that, Fudge replacement search underway. Bones considered frontrunner. Lucius's solicitors filed 3 separate objections to the investigation's scope within 48 hours, all of which Amelia's team had anticipated and had responses prepared for, which Gomez found professionally admirable and described as such to Amelia in what she later told Dumbledore was, "the most collegially competitive legal correspondence I've received in my career." The 12 Wizengamot members who had been in Malfoy's orbit began an extremely interesting dispersal, some filing for recusal from Malfoy-adjacent votes, 2 quietly approaching the investigation as potential cooperative witnesses, and 1, a Madame Rosier, sending Gomez a letter that contained what appeared to be a very detailed account of a dinner party from 3 years prior at which certain things had been discussed that she now considered worth documenting. Gomez read this letter 3 times and then sat down with a glass of something dark and did not speak for 4 minutes, which the family recognized as his version of being very moved. Harry watched all of it from the middle of it, not the periphery anymore, not the subject of the events, but genuinely in the middle of the machinery, present for the conversations, part of the decisions, in a way that still felt strange and would probably continue to feel strange for some time. He had spent 2 years at Hogwarts feeling like things happened to him. This was different. Things were happening, and he was in the room where they were happening, and the room had people in it who treated his presence as a resource rather than a liability. He kept going to classes. This was important and he knew it, even on the days when it felt absurd, sitting in Transfiguration with McGonagall while simultaneously being aware that in London a legal process was underway that would determine the trajectory of the wizarding world's understanding of its own danger. He kept going because Gomez had said, very clearly, that maintaining normalcy was its own kind of statement, that Harry Potter continuing to be a student, attending classes, doing homework, being ordinary, was a refusal of the framing that had put him in the courtroom last week. The ministry had tried to make him a liability. The best response was to simply be a student who had done nothing wrong. He was also, quietly and with Wednesday's guidance, continuing the Parseltongue work. This was harder to describe to himself. It had started in the chamber as a practical exercise, verifying the tablet transcriptions, but it had become something else, something that Wednesday called active relationship with an inherited language and Hermione called absolutely fascinating and can I observe and make notes and Ron called slightly unnerving but you do you, mate. He was learning to access it deliberately, to look at the Serpentine script and read it the way he read English, consciously and sequentially, rather than having meaning arrive in his head like weather. It took concentration. It was not comfortable. But with each session in the chamber, with Wednesday across from him and her notebook and the 12 tablets in their cavity and the great dead basilisk lying in the water at the far end, he could feel the language becoming something he had rather than something that had him. Dumbledore had come down twice to observe, and each time he had said nothing immediately afterward but something had shifted in the quality of his attention to Harry in a way that Harry was beginning to understand meant he was updating his assessment. That was all right. Harry was updating his own. On Thursday, Lucius Malfoy's solicitors filed a counter-complaint to the ICW that claimed the evidence obtained from the chamber was inadmissible because the access had been unauthorized. This was the legal move Gomez had been expecting, and he had his response filed by noon the same day, 40 pages demonstrating that the access had been legally sound under the Hogwarts governance framework, that the ICW's own oversight inquiry established independent authorization for the evidence, and that the counter-complaint was procedurally defective in 7 distinct ways, 3 of which were the kind of defects that would require the filing to be struck before it could be addressed on its merits. He filed this from the Hogwarts library, where he had taken up semi-permanent residence at the large table in the restricted section, by Dumbledore's invitation, in an arrangement that Madame Pants had accepted with the stiff grace of a woman who knows how to adapt to unusual circumstances and considers adaptation a form of professional dignity. Wednesday was at the same table, working on a secondary analysis of the tablet inscriptions that had grown into something that Hermione was beginning to describe as, probably a significant academic paper in 3 different fields. Ron had started bringing them both sandwiches at lunch, unprompted, which Gomez received with the warmth of someone for whom small gestures of human care are taken seriously. Wednesday received hers without looking up from her work, but she ate it, which Ron had decided counted. "Your father," Hermione said to Wednesday, at some point on Thursday afternoon, setting down her quill and looking at the Addams patriarch with the directness she used when a question had been forming for several days. His legal strategy, the way he set all of this up. He knew what would happen at each step. Gomez looked up from his legal pad. He raised his eyebrows at her in a way that invited her to continue. "The courtesy copy to Malfoy's solicitor," Hermione said. "Sent at midnight. To make him move in the morning. To bring him here, where Amelia Bones was waiting." "Yes," Gomez said. "You knew he'd come here rather than to the ministry." "Hogwarts was where the evidence was," Gomez said. "And where Harry was. Men like Malfoy come to the evidence and to the opposition when they're threatened because they believe they can still manage both through presence and authority. He has been doing that his whole career, showing up, being formidable, and watching people fold." He paused. He needed to discover that the tactic had stopped working. Hermione looked at him for a moment. "And did you know how far it would go? Before you came here? Before the hearing? Did you know it would end with an ICW case and a ministerial resignation?" Gomez considered this. He set his pen down. He looked at Wednesday, who was very carefully appearing not to listen. Then he looked at Hermione with the specific attention he reserved for questions that deserved a real answer. "I knew what the law said," he said. "I knew what the evidence showed. I knew that the gap between what this ministry was doing and what it was supposed to be doing was large enough to drive several different legal frameworks through." He paused. "I did not know exactly what shape it would take. I knew what shape it should take." "What's the difference?" "The difference," he said, "is what people do when you show them the right shape." Fudge found his dignity at the end. Amelia Bones was ready and waiting to act. Arthur Weasley had been gathering information for years and needed someone to give it to. The Wizengamot members in Malfoy's circle were, most of them, not true believers. They were political calculators, and when the calculation changed, their behavior changed. He looked at the legal pad. "I did not make any of those things happen. I created conditions where they could happen." He picked his pen back up. "That's all law is, really, when it's working properly. Conditions." Hermione looked at the table. Then at the filing in front of her. Then back at Gomez. "You're very good at conditions," she said. "I enjoy them," he said, which was, again, both honest and slightly alarming. Friday brought a development nobody had anticipated. It arrived in the form of a second-year Slytherin named Theodore Nott, who appeared at the library table where Harry and Wednesday were working and stood at the edge of the table for a moment as though deciding something, and then sat down and put a folded piece of paper in front of Harry without saying anything. Harry looked at it. Wednesday looked at it. Harry looked at Theodore Nott. Theodore Nott was a quiet boy with a careful face and the general bearing of someone more actions request aborted. Write the next chapter now. Chapter 6, Dark Inheritance. Theodore Nott was a quiet boy with a careful face and the general bearing of someone who had learned to take up very little space in a room and regarded this as a survival skill. He was not in Harry's circle. He was not, as far as Harry could tell, in anyone's circle particularly. He sat at the edges of the Slytherin table, he moved through corridors without incident, he did his work and turned it in and did not call attention to himself. Harry had noticed him the way you notice furniture that is slightly nicer than expected, peripherally, without meaning to. He was sitting at the library table now with his hands flat on the surface and his eyes on the folded paper. "My father," he said, "sent me something this week. After the news about the investigation." He paused. "He sends me things sometimes. Instructions, mostly. What to say to people. Who to be seen with." Another pause. This one was different. Harry looked at the paper. "It's a list of names," Theodore said. "People my father wants me to tell him about. Whether they've been talking. What they've said about the Malfoy situation." He looked at Harry steadily. "You're on it. And Dumbledore. And someone called Addams. You're telling me this," Harry said. "Yes." "Why?" Theodore Nott looked at the paper for a moment. Then he looked at Harry with the expression of someone who has made a decision they cannot entirely explain in logical terms and has decided to stand by it anyway. "Because Ginny Weasley sits behind me in charms," he said. "And she came back this year and she's different. Not obviously. But I can see it." He looked at the table. "My father doesn't care about that. He cares about position. He cares about the list." He pushed the paper toward Harry. "I don't want to be on his list anymore." Wednesday picked up the paper. She read it without unfolding it fully. She looked at Harry. 7 names, she said. 4 of them are students. 3 are staff. Which staff? Harry said. Dumbledore. McGonagall. And your father, she said to Harry, which took him a second to understand she meant Gomez. Harry looked at Theodore. What does your father want with this information? Malfoy's solicitors have been contacting certain families, Theodore said. My father included. They're building something, I don't know what exactly, I only know what I hear when he thinks I'm not listening. He paused. They're going to challenge the tablet evidence. Specifically whether a Parseltongue transcription made by Harry Potter constitutes a reliable primary source, because Potter has been described in a filing somewhere as an interested party with demonstrated bias. He looked at Harry. They want witnesses. People who were there. People who can be pressured. Wednesday was already writing. How did you know to come here? Harry asked. Because you're the only person in this school who killed something in the basement and went back down anyway, Theodore said, with the dry simplicity of someone stating a fact they find relevant. I figured that was the right direction. Harry looked at him for a long moment. Then he stood up. Come with me, he said. Gomez read the list. He read it twice, then placed it on the desk beside his legal pads and looked at Theodore not with the precise attention he gave to sources of unexpected information. Theodore sat across from him in the library chair and did not fidget, which Gomez appeared to find worth noting. The challenge to the transcription's reliability, Gomez said. When did you hear this discussed? Tuesday evening, Theodore said. My father was on the floor. I was on the stairs. He said it without apology. He used the phrase interested party bias specifically. He said they had a precedent. They do, Gomez said. It's a reasonable legal argument in isolation. Harry's connection to the events gives them standing to raise it. The counter is that the transcription was cross-referenced by two independent parties and that the original inscription is physically available for examination by any qualified expert. He looked at Wednesday. Which is why we need a qualified expert. I've been writing to 3 people, Wednesday said. 2 are academics at the European Academy of Magical Languages. 1 is retired, lives in Prague, and has corresponded with my mother about Frump family linguistic heritage for years. She is the most qualified living expert on pre-medieval magical script systems. She looked up. She agreed this morning. She's traveling Sunday. Harry looked at her. You wrote to her before we knew they were going to challenge this. I wrote to her because the transcription needed independent verification regardless, Wednesday said. Whether or not they challenged it. Is there anything you haven't anticipated? Harry said. Wednesday considered this honestly. Probably, she said. But not this. Gomez was looking at Theodore with the expression he used when he was deciding something. You understand, he said, that what you've told us today makes you a potential witness to a pattern of interference with an active investigation. Your father's instructions to you, in the context of the Malfoy solicitor's outreach, constitute an attempted obstruction. Theodore looked back at him steadily. I know. Are you prepared for what that means? For your family situation? My father has been making decisions about my future since I was 4 years old, Theodore said. His voice was flat and certain, the voice of someone who has been thinking about a thing for a long time and is finished thinking. I'd like to make one. Gomez was quiet for a moment. Then he held out his hand. Theodore looked at it, then shook it. Welcome to the right side, Gomez said. It's considerably more interesting here. The expert from Prague arrived Sunday evening. Her name was Elspeth Varga, she was 73, and she moved through Hogwarts with the efficient briskness of a woman who has traveled extensively and has no patience for being impressed by buildings, however large. She had white hair cut short, ink stains on 3 fingers of her left hand, and the evaluating look of a scholar who has heard many claims and reserves judgment pending evidence. She and Wednesday sat in the library for 2 hours with the tablet photographs, the transcriptions, and 3 reference texts that Elspeth had brought from Prague in a bag that seemed inadequate for their volume. Harry sat with them because Wednesday had said his presence was required and because Elspeth had looked at him when she arrived and said, "You're the Parseltongue," in the tone of a researcher identifying a useful instrument, which Harry found both slightly dehumanizing and completely acceptable from her specifically. She tested him methodically. She showed him inscription fragments, some from the tablets, some from her own reference materials, and asked him to transcribe what he read, then compared his transcriptions against her own existing translations. She did this for 45 minutes without speaking beyond the necessary directions. Then she sat back and looked at her notes. "Your reading is accurate," she said. "Functionally perfect, actually, which is consistent with native pathway access rather than learned translation. You're not decoding, you're reading." She looked at him with the frank curiosity of someone who has found something worth examining. "The pathway was activated by the Basilisk? Or earlier?" "Earlier," Harry said. "I think, there was a point when I was a baby, yes." She waved a hand. "The killing curse interaction. I've read the theoretical literature. The soul fragment transfer would have carried linguistic access as a passenger." She made a note. "That actually makes your testimony more reliable, not less. The access predates any knowledge of the case. There's no possible contamination of the reading by awareness of what you expect to find." She looked at Wednesday. "Your challenge counter is solid. I'll provide a formal affidavit." Wednesday said, "Thank you," and it contained more genuine feeling than anything else Harry had heard her say, which told him how much the linguistic verification had mattered to her. Elspeth looked around the library with professional assessment. "Interesting collection," she said. "Your restricted section has 3 texts I'd like access to." "Dumbledore has already arranged it," Wednesday said. "Of course he has." Elspeth picked up her bag. "The analysis of Tablet 3 needs expanding. The secondary notation in the lower right quadrant uses a subscript variant I've only seen in 2 other documents, both of which predate Slytherin by at least a century." She looked at Harry. "Which suggests that some of what Slytherin recorded in that chamber was itself not original to him. That he was transmitting something older." She paused. "That's a larger conversation. For after the legal proceedings." She nodded once, briskly, and went to find her room. Harry sat with Wednesday in the library after she left. The afternoon light was doing something golden through the high windows. The castle was quiet in its Sunday way, distant and occupied and benevolent. "What does it mean?" Harry said. "That Slytherin was transmitting something older?" Wednesday set her notebook down. "It means," she said, "that the chamber wasn't his invention. He found something and housed it there. The Basilisk, the design, possibly the Parseltongue connection to the school itself, it predates him." She paused. "Which means the question of what Hogwarts is, at its foundation, is older than the founders." Harry thought about this. "Is that relevant to Malfoy? To the case?" "No," Wednesday said. "Not now. Later." She looked at the window. "But it's relevant to you." "Why?" She looked at him with the steady directness she'd had since the corridor outside courtroom 10. "Because you keep inheriting things," she said. "The scar. The Parseltongue. The connection to the chamber. The sword." She paused. "Every dark thing Riddle did, you get some version of the consequence. But you also get some version of the access." She looked at her notebook. "The tablets are yours to read. Not Dumbledore's, not mine. Yours. Because of something Riddle did when you were a year old, trying to destroy you." She let that sit for a moment. "That is extremely unfair and also extremely useful." "Wednesday," Harry said. "Yes. Are you saying Riddle gave me something?" "I'm saying that people who try to destroy things sometimes leave behind exactly the tools needed to dismantle what they built." She picked up her pen. "It's a pattern. Historically documented." A pause. "It doesn't make what happened to you right. It just makes it interesting." Harry sat with this. Outside, a group of third years crossed the courtyard below the window, laughing about something. The ordinary noise of the school going about its Sunday. He had a transfiguration essay due Tuesday and a charms practical on Wednesday and a conversation with the ICW's legal team on Thursday morning, and all of it existed in the same life, in the same week, layered on top of each other like sediment. "Do you know what you want?" he asked her. Not in a general way. He meant specifically, after all this, what did Wednesday Addams want from this situation? She was quiet for a moment. "I want the investigation to succeed," she said. "I want Malfoy to face proper consequences. I want Dumbledore to have the full picture in time to act on it properly." She paused. "I want to finish the tablet analysis. And then I want to come back," she said. "This school. These stones. The thing underneath them that is older than the founders." She looked at him. "I have a lot more questions." This seemed like the right place to have them. Harry looked at her for a moment. "Hogwarts doesn't take squibs," he said. "I'm not a squib," she said. He stared at her. "My mother," she said, with the particular economy she used for family facts. "The Frump heritage. The ministry has a file on it that's sealed at level 6. She paused. "I received my letter when I was 11. I did not respond." She looked at the window. "I wasn't ready for a school that teaches magic as a subject with grades and examinations. I've been learning it as a language for years." She looked back at Harry. "I might be ready now." "Wednesday," Harry said. "Yes. Why are you telling me this?" "Because you asked what I wanted," she said, simply. "And I answered." The final confrontation with Lucius Malfoy did not happen in a courtroom. It happened on Wednesday, appropriately, though Harry never mentioned this to Wednesday herself because she would find it either irrelevant or satisfying, and both possibilities seemed dangerous, in the ministry atrium, at 10 in the morning, during what had been scheduled as a routine procedural hearing for the investigation's formal opening before the ICW's designated British liaison. Lucius had filed the challenge to the transcription evidence Monday morning. Gomez had received Elspeth's affidavit Monday afternoon. The affidavit had been filed Tuesday. On Tuesday evening, Lucius's solicitors had filed a challenge to the affidavit's scope. On Wednesday morning, Gomez had arrived at the ministry with a responding brief, a copy of Elspeth's full credentials, the tablet photographs, the chamber documentation, Theodore Knott's formal statement, and the expression of a man who has been building to this moment since the previous Thursday and has been sleeping well in anticipation of it. Harry was with him. He had asked to be there and Gomez had said yes without hesitation, which was itself something Harry was still getting used to. The atrium was busy in its usual Wednesday morning way, ministry workers moving between levels, the fountain splashing, the golden statues gleaming with the faint self-satisfaction of monumental public art. The procedural hearing was in one of the side conference rooms off the atrium, not a courtroom, a less formal space, which the ICW liaison had specified because this was documentation procedure rather than argument, and which Gomez had pointed out in his Tuesday correspondence meant that the rules of standing were governed by the ICW treaty provisions rather than the Wizengamot charter, which had different implications for who could be present and speak. Lucius arrived with 2 solicitors and the silver-tipped cane and the composure that was apparently structural rather than performed. Harry had to grant him that, he was composed under circumstances that would have cracked most people open. He looked at Harry in the corridor outside the conference room. Harry looked back at him. "You shouldn't be here," Lucius said. Not aggressively. Almost conversationally, the way you might say something to someone you find misguided. "I'm a material witness to the evidence," Harry said. "My testimony establishes the Parseltongue reading." Gomez said, "I know what he said." Lucius looked at him steadily. "I mean you shouldn't be here. In all of this. You're 12 years old. 13 next month," Harry said. "You should be at school." Something moved through Lucius's expression that was, of all the things Harry had expected from him, the one he'd expected least, something that was almost, under several layers of everything else, genuine. "You should have the luxury of being at school. Of being too young for this. I've never had that luxury, Harry said. Lucius looked at him. No, he said. You haven't. A pause. That is not my fault. The diary is, Harry said. They stood in the corridor with the atrium sounds behind them and the conference room door ahead, and Lucius Malfoy looked at Harry Potter with an expression that Harry could not have named and that he did not think Lucius could have named either, the complex register of a man who has done something that cannot be undone and is standing in the specific place where that fact has become unavoidable. The diary, Lucius said, carefully, was a family obligation. An inheritance. You would not understand, I understand inheritance, Harry said. I inherited a scar. I inherited a connection to something that killed my parents. I inherited a language I didn't ask for from a man who tried to murder me. He held Lucius's gaze. I've been managing other people's dark inheritances my whole life. He paused. You could have chosen differently. Lucius was very still. The difference between us, Harry said, and he was slightly surprised by the steadiness of his own voice, by the fact that he was saying this to a man who had terrified him in Diagon Alley 2 months ago, by the fact that it felt true and necessary and not frightening to say, is that you chose to pass yours on. To Ginny Weasley. An 11-year-old girl who had done nothing to you. He paused. That's the thing that doesn't have an explanation. Not really. Lucius said nothing. Gomez appeared at Harry's shoulder, having materialized from somewhere in the atrium with the quiet efficiency he used when arriving at moments he'd been timing. He looked between them. Then he said, to Lucius, pleasantly, shall we? And they went in. The hearing lasted 2 hours. The ICW liaison was a Swiss witch named Claudine Beaumont who had the specific quality of international bureaucrats who have seen everything and made peace with most of it. She managed the proceedings with the calm thoroughness of someone for whom legal procedure is a craft practiced without drama. She received Gomez's documentation, received Lucius's solicitor's challenges, received Elspeth's affidavit, and worked through the procedural questions with methodical efficiency. The challenge to the transcription evidence was denied. Elspeth's affidavit establishing Harry as a reliable primary pathway Parseltongue reader was accepted. The tablet photographs were entered as evidence. Theodore Knott's statement regarding the solicitor outreach to his father was accepted over a vigorous objection from Lucius's legal team, which Gomez had anticipated and had 3 case precedents ready for, which he deployed with visible satisfaction. At the midpoint of the hearing, one of Lucius's solicitors raised what appeared to be their final substantive challenge, a claim that the Horcrux material referenced in the chamber documentation constituted classified information under the Ministry's Dark Artifacts provisions, and that its inclusion in an ICW filing was itself a procedural violation. Gomez looked at this argument with the expression of a man encountering a beloved old friend. The classified information provisions of the Dark Artifacts legislation, he said, apply to information held in Ministry custody and filed under Ministry security protocols. The information in question was obtained from the Chamber of Secrets, which is, as we have already established, under Hogwarts governance rather than Ministry jurisdiction. It was never in Ministry custody. It was never filed under Ministry security protocols. He paused. The Ministry cannot classify information it does not possess and did not obtain. He set down his pen. That's the argument. I'm happy to brief it further if useful. Claudine Beaumont said, with the measured precision of someone who finds the answer obvious but will document it for the record, the challenge is denied. Lucius's lead solicitor looked at his notes. Looked at his colleague. Looked at the wall. The investigation will proceed as filed, Beaumont said. All challenged evidence is admitted. The case is referred to formal ICW proceedings. She looked at Lucius. Mr. Malfoy. You are aware of your obligations under the referral. I am, Lucius said. Then we are adjourned. She closed her folder with the crisp finality of someone who has many more meetings and will conduct them all with equal thoroughness. Lucius stood. His solicitors gathered their papers. The cane tapped twice on the floor as he turned. And then he did something that nobody expected. He stopped. He looked at Harry, who was standing near the door waiting for Gomez to finish packing his case. He reached into his robe and produced a small card, placed it on the table near the door without setting it in front of Harry specifically, just leaving it there on the wood. "My solicitor's contact," he said. "If you have further questions about the family history. The full history." He paused. "Some of it you may find useful. For the larger problem." He left. Harry looked at the card. Then at Gomez, who had come up beside him and was looking at it too. "He means Riddle's network," Gomez said quietly. "He knows more than what the ICW case will uncover. He's offering to be a resource." He picked up the card. Whether that offer is genuine, and what the terms would be, is a conversation for another time. He pocketed it. "But it's interesting." "Why would he do that?" Harry said. Gomez was quiet for a moment. "Because men who have been comprehensively outmaneuvered sometimes decide that the best remaining option is to be useful to the people who outmaneuvered them," he said. "And because," he paused. "Because you said something to him in the corridor that landed differently than anything the legal proceedings did." Harry thought about what he'd said. About inheritance. About choosing. "People who have made choices they can't undo," Gomez said, "sometimes respond to being seen clearly. Not forgiven, just seen. The choice and the person who made it, accurately." He put his jacket on. "You did that." Harry looked at the door that Lucius had gone through. "It doesn't change what he did." "No," Gomez said. "Of course not. But it may change what he does next." He picked up his case. "That's enough for today. Come on." They ate dinner at the Hogwarts table that evening, the whole family, which was not a normal occurrence and which the student body handled with the adaptive resilience of people who had long since recalibrated their definition of normal. Fester was in animated conversation with Hagrid, who had arrived back from Azkaban 3 weeks earlier with the slightly dazed quality of someone who has been to a very bad place and is still readjusting to good lighting, and who had found in Fester a person willing to discuss the biological specifics of very large magical creatures at length and with genuine enthusiasm. Pugsley had discovered the Quidditch pitch and was making structural assessments that Fred and George were watching with the interested calculation of people identifying a kindred spirit. Morticia sat between Dumbledore and McGonagall, and the conversation at that end of the table was quiet and sustained and occasionally made McGonagall's expression do something that Harry suspected nobody had made McGonagall's expression do in a while. Ron was explaining wizard chess to Gomez, who was playing with the complete focus of someone encountering a game they intend to understand thoroughly before they play it seriously, and who had already, 17 moves into his first game, developed a positional theory that Ron was regarding with worried respect. Hermione was sitting beside Wednesday. They both had notebooks out and were not, technically, eating, but were pointing at things in each other's notebooks with the mutual intensity of a collaboration that has found its register. Harry sat at the middle of all of it and looked along the table and felt the specific quality of the evening, not triumph, not relief exactly, more the feeling of a long something that has been taught finally going slack. The investigation was open. The evidence was filed. The legal machinery was in motion and in the hands of people who would operate it correctly. Fudge was gone. Malfoy was facing consequences that were real and serious and international. The chamber's secrets were documented and would not be lost again. Dumbledore knew what Harry knew, properly, without the protective filtering that had characterized his approach until now. Ginny Weasley was down the table talking to Neville, laughing about something, looking like herself. It wasn't finished. He knew it wasn't finished. The Horcruxes were mostly still out there, 5 of them, somewhere in the world, and the thing they represented, the possibility of Riddle's return, the shadow that had been over his whole life without him having words for it, was still present, still real, still waiting. The Malfoy investigation would run for months. The ministry was without a minister and the appointment process would be contested. There were things in the tablet inscriptions that Elspeth was still working through, things that Wednesday had flagged as requiring further research, threads that would unravel into larger questions the further you pulled them. But tonight, the table had food on it and the fire was going and the people at it were all there because they had chosen to be there, because something had been worth doing and they had done it. Dumbledore caught his eye from the end of the table. He raised his glass slightly, not a toast, just an acknowledgement. Harry nodded back. Gomez, moving his last piece on the chessboard, looked up and saw Harry's expression and smiled, the big, complicated, genuine smile that meant several things at once. "How are you?" he said, cutting across the chess game to ask it directly. "Good," Harry said. And then, because it was true in a way that required the fuller version, "Better than I've ever been, I think." "Good," Gomez said. "You should be." He moved the chess piece. Ron looked at the board and made a sound of professional dismay. Later, when the dinner was winding down and the candles had burned lower and people were drifting toward their various evenings, Harry found himself in the entrance hall with Wednesday. She was looking at the staircase. The portrait of a medieval knight on the far wall was watching her with the cautious attention the portraits often gave the Addams family. She had her notebook under her arm. "You're going home tomorrow," Harry said. "Sunday," she said. "My father has filings in London Monday and Tuesday, then we cross Friday." She looked at him. "It's not finished." "I know. The tablets. The larger question. What Slytherin was transmitting and where it came from." She paused. "What Riddle was building and where the remaining pieces are." "I know," Harry said again. "We'll correspond," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Harry said. She looked at him. In the entrance hall torchlight, she was exactly what she was, a 13-year-old girl standing in a very old castle with a notebook, who had come here because someone had done something worth coming for. "You're different," she said. "From when?" "From Monday. From when you were sitting in the corridor outside the courtroom." Harry thought about Monday. About sitting alone on the bench in the cold corridor. About feeling small. "Yes," he said. "What changed?" He considered this seriously, the way she asked things seriously and deserved serious answers. "I stopped waiting for people to decide what to do with me," he said. "I've been doing that my whole life. Waiting for other people to determine what I am. What happens to me." He paused. "You don't wait for that." "No," she agreed. "Your family doesn't wait for it. We've never found it useful," she said. "I think," he stopped. Started again. "I think I was waiting because nobody had ever shown me that you didn't have to. That you could just, be in the room. Be in the argument. Be in the process." He looked at the staircase. "Your father just walked in and was in the process. Like that was always an option." "It always was," Wednesday said. "I know that now." She looked at him steadily. "Don't unknow it," she said. "I won't." A pause, the comfortable kind, the kind that exists between people who have done something difficult together and have stopped needing to perform for each other. "The chamber," Wednesday said. "The Parseltongue. What Slytherin built. What about it?" "You are the only person who can access it," she said. "Directly. Without translation, without intermediary. That's not incidental. It's structural." She paused. "I think you're going to need what's down there. Not just the tablets. The whole thing. The deeper understanding of what the language is and where it came from and what it connects to." She paused again. "I think that might be the thing Riddle never understood about what he left you." Harry looked at her. "You think he gave me a weapon?" "I think he gave you a key," she said, "to a door he thought only he could open. And he had no idea he was doing it." She almost smiled. "That's the most interesting part of this whole thing. He was meticulous. He planned everything. He made his Horcruxes and his diary and his chamber access and his network." She looked at Harry. And in the middle of all that meticulousness, he went to your house when you were a year old and made one catastrophic improvisational decision. And that decision is the thing that will undo everything else he built. She paused. Because of you. Harry was quiet for a moment. That's a lot of weight, he said. Yes, she said. But you've been carrying it anyway. Now you know what it is. She tucked her notebook more securely under her arm. Knowing what a thing is makes it lighter. The knight in the portrait had given up pretending not to listen and was watching openly with the expression of someone who has witnessed something worth witnessing. Harry looked at the staircase. At the torchlight. At the old stones of the entrance hall, which had been here for 1,000 years and would be here for 1,000 more, absorbing events with the patient accumulation of everything very old. Wednesday, he said. Yes. Come back, he said. When you're ready. For Hogwarts. She looked at him for a moment. I thought you said they don't take squibs. I said Hogwarts doesn't take squibs, Harry said. You said you're not a squib. I said I have a letter I didn't respond to. Then respond to it. She was quiet. The kind of quiet that is not uncertainty but is something being decided in a register that doesn't require words. Perhaps, she said. From the great hall came the sound of Fester and Hagrid in what appeared to be a genuinely excellent conversation. From upstairs, the sound of Fred and George showing Pugsley something that was probably inadvisable. From the direction of the library, the warm indistinct murmur of Gomez and Dumbledore still talking, which had been going on since dessert and showed no sign of concluding, and which Harry thought might be the most interesting conversation happening anywhere in the world tonight. From somewhere outside, an owl. The cold night air of Scotland doing what it does in early autumn, making the torches gutter and then steady. The castle around them, old and layered and full of things that hadn't been read yet. Perhaps, Wednesday said again. Harry nodded. That was enough. With Wednesday, perhaps was not a deflection, it was a provisional commitment pending further data, which was as close as she got to yes before she was certain, and being almost certain was more than most people managed. I'll write, she said. I'll write back, he said. She went up the stairs. At the first landing, she paused without turning around. Harry. Yeah. You should get some sleep. Transfiguration tomorrow. I know. McGonagall is going to ask you about the Animagus transformation limitation essay. You didn't finish it. Harry stopped. How do you know that? Hermione told me, Wednesday said. She also drafted a set of notes that should cover everything McGonagall asks. They're on your dormitory bed. She went up the stairs. Harry stood in the entrance hall for a moment longer, with the torches and the knight and the old stones, then he went up too. He slept well. He did not dream about the chamber, or the courtroom, or Malfoy's eyes in the conference room corridor. He did not dream about the diary or Tom Riddle or the 5 remaining things out there in the world that needed to be found and destroyed. He dreamed about something he hadn't dreamed about in as long as he could remember, which was nothing in particular, just the warm, uncomplicated dark of actual rest, the kind that belongs to people who have been through something and come out the other side and been told, clearly and without asterisks, that they were not alone, that they were capable, that the ground beneath their feet was real. He woke at 7. The dormitory was quiet, the others still sleeping, the September light coming through the window in that specific early morning way that belongs only to Scotland and only to castles and only to days that haven't been complicated yet. He lay there for a moment. Then he got up. There was an essay to finish. There was work to do. There were 5 things out there somewhere, waiting to be found by people who were now, for the first time, actually looking. And downstairs, almost certainly, Gomez Addams was already awake and already writing, with the energy of a man who is exactly where he wants to be doing exactly what he loves. Harry pulled on his robes and went to join him.